Okay, streaming. That thing working. Okay. Okay.
It's also, so this is in a playlist, right?
Yeah.
Okay, sweet.
It's with everything.
So now we are live.
We are live.
We are live, sweet. I'll fetch a link and I'll tell our lovely people on Discord.
The WD-40 has definitely helped.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
Do you know how to make my YouTube not in Norwegian? Because there should be a button here, but there is not in once I'm in YouTube Studio. So
I think it might be connected. So your default Henning account is still technically, that's the one that's logged into Google. That's your Google account that's logged in. And I think that takes precedence over all the other accounts.
I just thought I'd changed all that to English. I've been pretty methodical about doing these things.
No, it's every time you send me a screenshot from YouTube, it's always like, oh, it's in Norwegian.
Colonial.
Yeah, because I think like here, but no, you're not even using Chrome, are you?
No.
Fuck, then I don't know. Because like I'm using Chrome and I'm logged in. So, no, that is weird.
Yeah. We have one viewer. That's pretty good. Hey guys. Hey Emil. The one viewer is Emil.
It's Emil.
Who I just sent a link.
Amazing.
That's nice. Did you make a thumb for it or?
No.
Okay.
I've just put it up so I can start making one now.
That'd be cool. Because then I can share that on Buffer.
Yeah.
Once we have that. That seems to really help when we just push it out on a bunch of different places. So for people who are joining now, we're doing the we're just doing like nice little Q&A.
Oh yeah. 1 sec.
Hey Joe. Yes, we're just getting stuff set up now. We can make a little thumbnail image and just gonna have a nice time. What we're seeing in the background is a collection of some of our premium tutorials, which are just playing in the background, and we'll just do a Q&A. We're not doing any sculpting this time. This is gonna be just Morten and I just having a good time and just seeing what's up. What are you drawing, Joe? It's pretty cool to be up at 6 a.m. I haven't seen that number apart from when I'm flying. Any tips on using zero measure? You should figure out the limits of zero measure. Zero measure is amazing when you're using it correctly for maybe background props, or if you're doing like concept sculpts and you just need quick topology, but you should not use it for final things. I find that using guides doesn't really help a whole lot. You can do it, but there is just a lot of cleanup for it. So I don't really have any crazy tips using it, because a lot of it is just click the button, but it is more figure out the restrictions of it. Can ZBrush handle more polygons than Blender without lag? Like, I haven't actually tested it recently.
No, I think Blender is actually becoming very capable of super high poly stuff. The advantage there is that it's not just utilizing the CPU like ZBrush, it's actually, you have access to GPU as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because that's one thing that I think people get a bit wrong when it comes to sculpting, where it's not just the performance. The performance in ZBrush is fine. I don't have issues there. If I could subdivide twice more, like, and have my regular models be 200 million, that wouldn't really solve any problems, because most of the time I'm sticking to around, like, I don't know, 1 million. And then I'm subdividing up and maybe I'll hit like 10 million. And so right now that wouldn't really solve a whole lot. Do you have any thoughts on opening your own studio someday? Yeah, we're not doing that.
Nope, that's not happening.
That's not happening. I just want to know, I love your content. I just want to know if you have a human anatomy course. We do have a human anatomy course. I'll find a link for you there. We don't have one of our exclusive ones, but we do have one from Victoria 3D, which is pretty good. I believe it's like 21 hours. Let me just find a link to you right away.
Okay, it was a mistake putting on the wool sweater.
Yeah, it gets a bit warm.
Next portfolio review. Yeah, that's an interesting question. We are talking about doing more streams, so maybe that's something we could do soon. That would be nice. It's been a while since we've done one.
Here is here's the anatomy course. I'll just link this. In your tutorial about Maya and UV map, when I press Shift X and try to move this part, I get many edges dragged out. What do I do? I would check if you just technically in Maya, if you are trying to move a shell around and you get more things, just make sure soft selection isn't enabled. It's a bit hard to troubleshoot these things without actually looking at it, but that can be an issue.
Any plans for Christmas? Well, you had plans.
Yeah,
now
I
they've
had plans
changed.
to go to Norway, and they were like, "No, you can't come in." So I'm not going to Norway.
Yeah, I think I'll just spend some time with family and then be in a forest at some point, just chopping down some trees.
If I had a PlayStation 5, I would have been playing on PlayStation 5, but
right.
I don't. So
They were saying that there might be more stock coming before the end of the year, actually.
Then I might be playing on PlayStation 5.
That would be nice.
More portfolio roast, more. Yeah, I would love to do that.
Portfolio roasts. I like that.
When do you know you're ready to apply for a position at a studio? Like there are actually ways of knowing that, or which one when you're ready, and that is to ask people who are working there. Currently, it's if you're just trying it out and you're just kind of like poking a box with your portfolio and seeing what works, that's a bit hard. But if you were to ask somebody who works at that specific studio or is working professional in general, then that's probably the best way to know if you are ready. This is something I believe I spoke about in the last stream as well. When you are emailing people, which again is the best way to know if you're ready or not, be very brief. Assume that the people you're emailing are busy. Don't write them a novel. Go, hey, I'm looking for a job at Studio X. I'm looking for this position. Here's my portfolio. Am I ready? If not, are there any major things I can do to fix it? Or do you have some resources available, like some links to tutorials or books or articles or anything you can do to help me? It's because essentially what that person will then have to do is just read a quick email, look at a quick portfolio and go yes or no, and then maybe find a few links for you.
Yeah, you want to make it as easy as possible for them to reply to you.
Yeah. Hey, Gustav is here.
Which Gustav is that?
Gustav Lindström.
Oh, hello, Gustav. It's been a while.
Yeah, that's been a while. He just gave us 50 Swedish crowns for the FlippedNormals beer fund.
Nice.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I hope you're doing well in Sweden, Gustav. If you are in Sweden or the UK, if you're still in the UK.
I'll be in Sweden next week.
Probably not the same place as Gustav.
Unless he lives in a forest. Then no. He might though.
A lot of forests in Sweden. Hey, I'm a Linux user and ZBrush is not available for Linux, but Blender is. So what's the alternative that you suggest? Which is as good as ZBrush or similar? I mean, if you are only on Linux and you want to sculpt, then probably Blender. I would recommend if you're serious about character art, I would recommend also using Windows for that. But you have the tools you have available. So in that case, then I'm sure Blender will do a fine job at that.
Sorry, Gustav. I won't be near Stockholm. I think it's like Karlstad, some forest near Karlstad or something like that. Yes, I'm gonna chop down trees and make fires out of the trees. And
that's what Morten does. Is Mudbox still a thing? Mudbox, well, Emil, Mudbox
exists.
Kind of a thing. It seems like it's like a zombie software in the sense that it's not it's not dead. Like it's not like Softimage or XSI, which is like actually it's actually a dead software. But Mudbox is also not really being developed. They're adding like a feature here and there, but like it's not up with the times.
No.
It still has some cool pipeline features, like you can import your maps into it and sculpt on top of them, though you have to still change the naming convention to Udemy for there. So there are some quirks, but it still has a place in a production, but its role is getting less and less. Would you intend to do a tutorial about clothes with Marvelous Designer in Maya as well? I don't know how to manipulate the mesh produced in quads and triangles as well. Well, that sounds like a Morten question.
I feel like I've done something.
I feel we've done that. Like how to get clean topology with Marvelous Designer.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Maybe there's even a free video on our channel about that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I should definitely do that.
Yeah.
Because it's super easy. The workflow between Marvelous and Maya like the workflow is the production workflow basically. That's what everyone uses in production, where you have multiple meshes, so you can keep transferring the detail levels. But yeah, let me have a look if we have one of those. Otherwise, we should definitely do that.
Do you use a pen tablet in Maya? I actually sometimes use a pen tablet in Maya. I use it it can be nice for modeling. A mouse is also fine there. The reason I prefer it sometimes is due to the fact that I can change my hand up, so it's just more ergonomically.
Yes, exactly the same for me. I will switch to a mouse if I need precision.
Yes.
Like if I'm dialing in numbers or something, then I'll switch to the mouse. But yeah, I also switch between them for ergonomic reasons.
I can't use a tablet in Blender. I don't know why. Like, I'm not saying it's a technical limitation. I'm just saying Henning can't use a tablet in Blender.
You never learned how.
No, I never learned how. I'm sure it's just a thing you have to get used to.
Yeah.
And particularly if you're sculpting, then you just have to.
Okay, Ring is saying that they've done that. Yeah. Okay, so it definitely exists. If we're talking about the same thing.
I don't know what we're talking about.
I think we're still talking about the Marvelous one. Maybe?
Oh, okay. Yeah,
Or maybe no, that's probably the other one. Low poly in order to texture in ZBrush. I'm confused now.
Yeah. Will you make sculpting videos for Blender users? A complete character sculpting package. So the thing is that Blender needs to relax a little, because the problem with doing Blender tutorials right now is that it's progressing so fast, which is a good problem to have, mind you. But it means that it's very hard for us to make tutorials for it, because maybe in a week it's completely obsolete.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the Alien video we did, like, I don't know, a year ago, where we sculpted in Blender the Morden character from Mass Effect, the sculpting principles are still the same. You know, nothing changes about the sculpting principles, but how you technically execute that sculpting wise has completely changed in Blender.
Yeah.
Which makes it a little hard to follow, but also hard to make tutorials for. You have to think about, it's a time investment, and if our investment becomes irrelevant a month later because a massive overhaul again to the sculpting workflow, then that's obsolete.
Or it might not even be like they're completely revamping it, but it could be that they're moving the buttons around.
Yeah.
I was a Modo beta tester for years, and I was very careful about doing tutorials, like recording things with beta software. I'm not even sure if I legally could, but I absolutely didn't, just because what happens if you are if you're doing something and everything changes, the button changes location. Button still does the same thing, but it's in a different interface.
Yeah.
Is this being sculpted in real time? Yes, it is, but in the past. We're currently playing a video now this is from Introduction to ZBrush, where we are sculpting this like cave troll character. Intro to ZBrush is really nice because it focuses on all the tools you need to learn in ZBrush, as well as some sculpting concepts. But this is from that. It's one of the chapters. I think it's like a half-an-hour chapter or something like that. When to use 3ds Studio Max and when to use Maya. So the thing is, those software are very similar in what they can do. The Venn diagram between those two is almost a complete overlap. When you would use them is when you professionally have to. Like if you work in a game studio and they're using Max, you gotta use Max. If they're using Maya, you gotta use Maya. So it really is just what professionally do you have to use. They're the same price. It's made by the same company. So not a whole lot of difference between those two in terms of what the final result is. It really boils down to a lot of personal preference.
I wonder when they will sort of phase one out.
Very curious about that one.
Yeah.
How can I survive as a 3D artist in nowadays? I assume now we're talking about Corona as well, and the 3D art is a bit weird one now, because if you're making games right now, there's nothing stopping games companies from continuing to work. Granted, they have a remote pipeline. But if you're in film and commercials, there are two main hurdles there. First one is that, well, you can't film anything, which is a huge one, meaning that film is essentially just on hold for now. And commercials are a bit on hold as well. While you can do those fully CG, a lot of companies are struggling, and the first thing they're slicing is the commercial budget. So I would recommend that you look for things which may not be completely obvious. Obvious things would be film, games, or commercials. But maybe there is an emerging market in something like AR or VR, maybe figurines. See if there are different areas which are using 3D, and see if there are job opportunities in those areas. Because a lot of those jobs they're being developed by big tech companies, and they aren't necessarily affected by Corona at all. So if there is a way to do those things, that can be nice. For instance, in architectural visualization, like this is not based on data, but I will assume that a lot of those are seeing an uptick, because currently people can't go to viewings. And if they can make real-time viewings now, you can just do it through your browser or through a simple software. I'm assuming that's going to also have an uptick. Is Mari ever used in games? I don't know. I don't think it's used a whole lot. It's used in game cinematics. Mari is phenomenal if you're doing characters and if you're doing specific people. Like if you have scans and you have projections of them, you can project them up and clean them up and really get in there. But I don't think it's used a whole lot. But if somebody in the comments can elaborate on that, I'm generally very wary of commenting on things I don't know too much about, like games. So if somebody has any ideas, is Mari used a lot in games? Please let us know in the comments. Do you recommend Blender for sculpting? It depends if you have something else available. It looks like it's becoming a great software for it. So if it's between nothing and Blender, I absolutely recommend it. If it's between Blender and ZBrush right now, then I recommend ZBrush.
Yeah, the one of the tricky things when it comes to Blender and sculpting is that, like many of the new things in Blender, they aren't production tested. So even though there might be cool features, there are things you can do in Blender that you can't do in any other software. It goes the other way around as well. Like a lot of the production aspects of it, like working with it in a pipeline between different departments, Blender can be restricted sometimes. So there is that to consider as well. But if it's just for you and you're just enjoying sculpting, then Blender, go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, that would suck if you have a department of sculptors and they're all using ZBrush, and then one person uses Blender and you have to take over from that. Like that's going to be really annoying. Emil is saying that he has not heard of Mari being used in games. So Emil, he's joining FlippedNormals after New Year's, which we were very excited about, and he's worked in games for like 7 years at Ubisoft. So we should listen to Emil. If he says Mari isn't used a lot, it's probably not used a lot. Is Mari still preferred for professional cinema, now with better Udemy workflows from Painter? So for me, I was a texture artist in film, and there were two main features I needed in order to switch from Mari to Painter. One was Udemy. Udemy are now here. I haven't used this a whole lot, but it seems pretty cool. And the second one is you need proper like projection tools and warping tools. That means that currently in Painter, you're just painting directly on the surface. I believe you can project as well, but you can't warp what you're projecting. It's really important that you can warp what you're projecting, because if you have a if you have some photographic reference, which you do in film all the time, you need to take this and you need to warp it to fit the character. Currently, that is really annoying to do in Painter. You kind of have to just move the projector around a little bit and get in there. So I would still require that feature. And then afterwards, then we're still talking about performance. How does it deal with a bunch of layers, 8K, 50 UDIMs and all that? But yeah.
Yeah, it's really one of the strong suits of Mari is its insane data handling.
Yeah.
With, if we're talking something like Pacific Rim with 100 UDIMs for one character, right? And it's got multiple maps. We've got albedo, spec, disp, bump,
20 masks.
mask. And you got to do stuff procedurally as well while you're texturing. And you bake stuff down, you flip it over. There's a lot of performance sort of showstoppers that you could run into when it comes to Painter. I'm sure they could get after it, but it's probably just going to take a little while.
And it's not like it's going to be a hard switch. Like now everyone switches. It's going to be a gradual thing. If you're doing props, at least like more background level props, Painter is absolutely phenomenal. If you're doing more bespoke things, like something more hero-like for a prop or a vehicle or something, I'm sure you can still do a hell of a lot with Painter. It's probably going to turn into a cocktail between Painter, Designer, maybe some Nuke if you need that, and Mari. You as a texture artist, you aren't necessarily just restricted to one tool. Here's a question as well. I've seen Craig ask. Assume that's how I pronounce it. Do you think joining a college like Nomon is worth all the money they charge? That, again, all my questions are going to be that depends. If you, my general reply to is it worth the money they charge, which is significant. I believe something like Nomon is something like 83,000 for 2 years, maybe including housing. Yeah. Then I would say if you can afford it. And my caveat here with afford it is, do you have a way of paying it back? Not do you have a way of getting the money, because everyone does, because you can get something like a federal loan, or you can get a loan for that. That is not the problem. The problem is, how do you pay it back? You need to have a plan for that. And that plan cannot just be, well, straight out of school, I'm going to get a job paying $200,000 a year and I'm going to pay back the loan in a year. You have to find a realistic path, because otherwise that, worst case, I've seen this happen a few times, and those stories always upset me quite a lot, where you see people who's been doing these schools, maybe they've gone to a few of them, so they might, some people are $500,000 in debt, and it's insane, and they don't have the skills yet. That is the scary situation which you want to avoid. You want to avoid being in a situation where you attend one of these schools and then you do not get the skills you need. If you get the skills and you really get the job afterwards, then, and you have a way of paying it back, maybe. I would still say probably not. But if you do not put your absolute best into it for those like 2 or 3 years or the 1 year, and you aren't ready for the industry afterwards, I would say that's very dangerous. Can I use a photo of my high school pass and get a substance painter for free? And does my school need to know about it? I mean, that's worth it to simply just ask them about it. The thing is that they have an interest in students. I mean, even if you're a high school student, it's to start using their software, because that just means you're going to be using their software forever. So if you have any doubts about what the license is, just straight up just ask them, and they might be lenient. Maybe less when we're dealing with Adobe now, but I'm sure there's still some. I'm sure they're still going to listen to it. Any tips for searching for freelance projects? That is a tricky one, because a lot of freelancers, they don't search for freelance per se. They have a good network of people and with relationships they're working up for a long time. So what I recommend there is build a network. That is the long-term solution for it. In terms of specifically freelance contracts, maybe check out job sites. Maybe there is something, I don't know how Fiverr works, if there are any like real jobs there, or if that's more like design me like a logo for $20. But check job sites as well. I haven't been doing a whole lot of freelance, apart from the ones I did do. That was through my network. Are you baking the detail on? Sorry. Are you baking the detail on the Minotaur with a normal map? If you watched yesterday's video, like the top 5 hacks where you shouldn't do, but we use all the time, I would probably do one of those hacks, which is using Decimation Master for my renders. I don't think I'll take the Minotaur through as a final project with texture maps and everything. So I'll probably finish the sculpt. I'll take it through a quick zero measure pass, reproject the details, maybe pose him really quick using Caesars. Then I'll take him and decimate him, throw him into probably Blender or Arnold using the lighting scenes we have. And then from there, I would just do some quick Photoshop on top.
Yeah, most of my rendering, well, not even most, all of my rendering is exclusively done in Blender now. Yeah. I've completely switched because there's no need for me to have a license of any other render engine with the kind of work that we do now. Obviously, it's not like production work anymore, but with the teaching we do and presentation, everything can be done in Blender, and most of the time it can even just be done in Eevee, actually.
Eevee is amazing. What do you do with a sculpture after you're done? And do you make money only from YouTube? Yeah, so what do you do with a sculpture? I just kind of let it be there forever on a hard drive. I don't necessarily do a whole lot with it. Maybe we do something from, maybe we do something with it in terms of a tutorial. And the second question, do you make money only from YouTube? No, we absolutely don't.
We make no money from YouTube.
Yeah,
actually.
If you check out FlippedNormals.com, like a lot of people don't know that, our main business is the FlippedNormals marketplace, where we have a lot of exclusive training. This is how we survive as a company. We make training, and we have a lot of cool products like the lighting scenes and our intro to sculpting, the skin kit, and all of that. So yeah, we make basically no money through YouTube, and we survive through FlippedNormals.com.
Yeah, I mean, and just while we're at it, if you're interested in picking up any of that stuff that you find on FlippedNormals, all of it is 50% off during this Black Friday. So
this is a great question. I actually had something similar about this recently. I'm thinking of writing an article about this. How should somebody follow tutorials and learn effectively? It might seem like a noob question, but I would love to know a method to learn things through the tutorials effectively. For me, it depends on, first you have to figure out what do you want to learn from the tutorial. When I'm looking at tutorial right now, I'm mostly wanting to learn specific things. If I'm watching a ZBrush tutorial, it is, okay, what's new in ZBrush and how specifically do I use this feature? If I were to learn a Houdini tutorial, or watch a Houdini tutorial, it would be, I need to just get an overall workflow, like what is Houdini and how does this whole thing work? So there are very different things. So figure out what do you want to learn from it and approach it from that point of view. If you're watching our Intro to Painter and the only thing you're interested in is learning how fill layers work, just go to the fill layers chapter and just watch that.
I find that learning becomes very different from when you just start out to after you've done it for a few years. In the beginning, there's this sensory overload of just everything. Your brain is getting adjusted to learning, and also learning at a rapid pace, and you have to learn everything, right? So it can be quite overwhelming, but as you start to know more and more things, you can sort of more easily relate concepts to each other. And like Henning is saying, maybe you're just after a specific thing. After a few years, you want to learn something about fill layers or whatever. Then you very targeted go towards that. And it's like the more you learn, the easier it becomes to learn. It's like a skill that you build up.
It's kind of like if your knowledge is a tree. After you've been doing 3D for a while, you just need to like add a few, like maybe it's a new branch or maybe it's a leaf on it, and you already have the supporting thing. But while you're new to it, then you are dealing with things like where do I plant my tree? You don't really have anything to attach it to. So in that case, if you're watching tutorials, you have to just take a lot of notes, and then I recommend following the tutorials one-to-one. Find beginner tutorials. You really need to start with beginner tutorials, because otherwise you just straight up can't follow along. We try to be very clear on that with our tutorials. Like for instance with Intro to Maya, I can link that below. Intro to Maya, that is a beginner tutorial. That assumes that you don't know anything about Maya. If you were to watch something more advanced, then you wouldn't be able to follow, because we're not going to tell you how to add segments to a cube. We're just going to add segments to the cube. So figure out the skill level and follow it. Follow every single step. Don't assume you know it. Just follow it and try to get the end result as close as possible. Now that is if you're new to it.
That's where, especially as you progress, following teaching, this is something that we've discovered ourselves as well with some of our tutorials, that following a tutorial which doesn't have a clear demographic in terms of skill level is incredibly infuriating, because if you're a beginner and you're watching a tutorial where parts of it are for beginners, parts of it are for intermediates, you can't follow along. If you're more intermediate and it's again the same thing, you get very frustrated about the beginner parts, because yes, I don't need to know what a vertex is. I know, I've been doing this for 15 years, right? So that can be incredibly frustrating.
Here's a question. Can you explain what should be an asset modeling reel? What I recommend to do is be varied. You don't want in an asset modeling reel, essentially a production modeler, you don't want that to be the same things. You don't want to have 3 cars, because that just shows that cool, you know how to model cars. You should show variety, and then you should first figure out what industry you're going for. If you're going for games versus film, that's a very different skill set. But show variety in it. If you're going for a general modeler, then you need a mix between some hard surface, maybe some environments. You need to show something organic, maybe a character as well. It's good to show range. Show something which the studio can go, yep, this person is ready to join this company right away.
Fritz is also curious about my hobby, going to Sweden on the weekends to chop wood. For anyone, what do you want to know? I'm just I'm heading up there for about a week with my brother, and we have a tent, some sleeping bags rated to minus 17 degrees because it's going to be freezing.
Hope it doesn't go that far.
Yeah, but generally when I go on trips like that, it's just I just want to get away from stuff, and I just go into nature, find a spot, set up a camp, do some fishing, chop down some trees, make a fire, just chill out in the forest basically.
Yeah, I see the appeal of that when
it's
so
something
connected.
It's something that I found myself needing more and more, because most of my adult life has been focused on just work, and everything sort of connected to a screen, a computer, all digital. So going out there, I tend to, I always bring my phone with me, but most of the time it's not even turned on, and I just disconnect completely, come back a lot more recharged. I'm always super tired because I sleep horribly in the forest, but it's really nice being out there.
It's on your terms at least.
Yeah.
Here we're starting with, I think the video here is from Intro to Sculpting. I think this is the starting points for the dwarf. Could not be.
It could be anything right now.
Could really be anything. I believe this is real-time sculpting of Intro to Sculpting the dwarf.
Someone also wanted to know if we plan on doing more interview-style videos like the one we did with Alan McKay, and it's basically like a debate every time we get either asked or find someone who's interested in this, because let's take our talk with Alan McKay, for example. It was super interesting talking to Alan. Alan is someone that both Henning and I have known about for many, many years. He's a veteran within the industry. And so we learned a lot personally from the talk, and it was really nice to connect with him. Just like when we did the talk with Blender Guru, we did one with Danny Mac as well. That one never came out for technical reasons.
Happens.
But they're all really fun to do. The problem is that there's such a low demand for it when it comes to our viewership, unfortunately. Those are the videos that always, without fail, performs the worst. So most of the time it's not, unfortunately, not worth our time doing it, unless we want to do it for personal reasons, I would say.
Yeah, in terms of, that's something we have to keep in mind when we are a company, and this is our job. So we have to be very conscious of how are we spending our time, and a lot of it comes straight down to input versus output.
Yeah. Do you plan to make a full character sculpting tutorial in Blender? I feel like that question's been there before.
Yeah, we've seen that before. I would love to do that. We have to wait until Blender becomes more stable.
Yeah.
Or like it becomes like not in terms of it crashes a lot, but in terms of development slows down until they stop touching sculpting for a little bit. Because that's what we mentioned before. If you just join now, then essentially the reasons we are hesitant to do a Blender sculpting tool right away is simply because of the development speed is so fast, and our tutorial could become obsolete right away.
We have this is the first style of that kind of tutorial we're doing. I've been working on like a skull kit with Majora's Mask piece, which is fully recorded and almost ready to be voiced as well. I think it's going to be like 8 or 9 hours of just real time. Everything's real time, nothing cut away, where you see me going from that 2D concept of Majora and sort of recreating it in 3D. That's the first time we're doing like a full character like that. And so I want to see how that one performs. But I'm also right now playing around with the idea of doing a full series in ZBrush where I base it off of the Mandalorian, but maybe like a Japanese inspired Mandalorian concept or something. And then doing that all within ZBrush as a full character.
Yeah, that sounds like a really fun one. That would be really nice. I would love some like full on live, some full on like tutorials showing everything.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know anything about coffee. There's probably a lot of good coffee in Denmark, but I don't know.
Neither Morten nor coffee. We are like the worst CG artists.
Actually, yeah, it's like sacrilege.
Yeah. All right.
There's a lot of questions.
Here's a good one. Hey guys, I just signed a 3-month freelance contract with a game company to test out how well we work together. It's my first 3D job. What are some things I should expect? And do you have any tips? I assume this is remote. Regardless, you need to provide value to the company, I would say, where try to go a little bit above and beyond what you're being asked, instead of purely they ask you to do this exact thing and you do that exact thing. Try to maybe provide some more design variations or show some more reference and come with the input of your own ideas. People really like that. If you can bring your own flavor to it, then they do appreciate that.
Yeah, it's making yourself important to the company and not just becoming, another cog in the machine, basically.
Yeah. Another thing to be aware of as well is that you have to find the hierarchy in the company, not just from like an evil business point of view that it's a company, but you have to figure out how it works in terms of how do you get things done? Are you asking the guy next to you for stuff to be approved and he doesn't have approval, say, or are you asking the person who can actually approve it? So figure these things out as well. Take notes of everything. I really just recommend carry a notebook in the beginning and just take notes of all the things, particularly in meetings as well.
Yeah, the stream will be up later as well. Just someone else is asking a work-related one. Is it possible to work at companies in different countries, or do barely any companies work online? Well, this is actually something that we talked about for quite a while in the video with Alan McKay, sort of decentralizing the work that we do when it comes to creative work. And for a long time, thanks to, in large parts, Disney with their insane NDAs, you haven't been able to work remote or any other place except inside the company because they've been afraid of leaks and crazy NDAs. But with the current environment where a lot of companies are switching to online only and Zoom, praise Zoom, I think it's becoming more and more viable. I really hope we see this change in a lot of companies, that they, going forward, kind of want to keep this up, because I think it enables a lot more people to do the job. Like, you don't have to move your entire family to a country to apply for a modeling position anymore. Now you can just do it from wherever you live. So that's something that I hope to see grow and continue happen.
I think this is where the market forces will force company to do it, because we don't know when people can go back to work. Like, do you want to risk that? Do you want to risk that? Like, you have two levels of, or two risk factors here. The first one is your stuff gets leaked. The second one is you risk not having any source of income for a long time. I would say that you don't want to risk. One of them is existential to your company. The other one is an annoyance, meaning leaks are an annoyance, but they're not like, if the ending to Star Wars is leaked, it's not like Star Wars is not gonna work. But if Star Wars doesn't get filmed, that's an existential threat. So I think at some point, if this keeps on going and they're seeing that we can't be in the studio for a year or more, which some companies have just committed, we're not going to be in for all of 2021. We are not going to be in-house. Then they will just have to accept remote work.
What are the things required to be a character artist in games? Is Emil here? I think, without being a games artist myself, a lot of the skills sort of carry over. That's a lot of the stuff that we teach, regardless, on the platform. It's always about fundamentals. It's the fundamentals of anatomy, of sculpting, of design. Then obviously there are specific things to games where your layouts, UVs, how you bake, different ways to optimize your meshes. But those are the more technical aspects of whether it's game creation or VFX creation that anyone can learn. And I wouldn't say it's not as difficult as the fundamentals.
No.
But once you get control of the fundamentals, then you can sort of just add the technical stuff on top more easily. Not that it's easy, but more easily.
Yeah, it's a hell of a lot easier to teach somebody how to UV map properly than it is to teach them to sculpt properly.
Yeah. Yeah, because you can give people a guideline for, these are generally the kinds of layouts we want for this kind of character or this kind of prop. And then you just continue doing that, maybe with some variation, if there's some asymmetry in the character, or if it's a large character versus a small character or a creature, but generally the principles stay the same.
Here's a good question from A Quattro S1. I struggle with comparing myself to my classmates. I always feel like I'm not as good. Have you dealt with this feeling and how do you overcome it?
Yeah, it's very common.
This is a tricky one, because like comparison is the thief of joy, and I feel that no matter how good you are, you're always going to compare yourself to people. And even if you're like the best person in class, then you're probably, unless you're incredibly cocky, you're still probably going to feel super good about it. First off, I recommend don't really compare yourself to your classmates. Compare yourself to like the broader internet in order to figure out what your skill level is, at least just purely for like figuring out what your portfolio is like. But then another thing is, it's like there is like a slightly cheesy saying that you compare your behind the scenes to other people's highlight reels, meaning just that you are comparing your worst moments to their best moments. You're not necessarily knowing their insecurities, and you're not necessarily seeing their work in progress the same way you're seeing yours. You're not necessarily seeing their abandoned projects. So I don't know. It just sucks when you're comparing yourself to other people. It's just a hard one.
Yeah, if I found over the last, year or so, I've sort of solace in the comparisons, because for a long time I was comparing myself to other people, but with a negative mindset, where it was like, well, I'm not as good as they are, and I can't do this stuff because I'm not as good as this X and Y person or whatever. But in the last year or so, my mindset has shifted to a more positive one, where I look at it as more as inspiration of where I want to get to. I'm not going to get there in a year, 5 years, or 10 years, or ever, really. But looking at, let's call it your competition that you feel is better than you, looking at it with a more positive mindset and then thinking about it as inspiration instead of like comparing your lack of skill to them, but more as like the potential for what you can reach. That's really helped me.
What helps me as well is this is more like game theory, more like fundamental stuff, not necessarily related to art. But you have like the concept of zero-sum game and non-zero-sum game. Essentially, here's a game, it's a football game. In order for me to win, you have to lose. But then you have a lot of other kinds of games as well where we can all win. This is it can be like trade, for instance. I give something to you, you give something to me, and we both win from this trade. I see CG as a non-zero-sum game, meaning that if you're comparing yourself to your classmates and you're thinking, if they are better than me, then I lose and they win.
Yeah.
When in reality, it's not like that. It's not like they get the job and therefore they took all the jobs. It means that if they get the job, cool. Now you have a person in that company who can help you get a job as well. If they are improving, that means you now have somebody around you who's now better, which means you can improve from that. And when you're improving, that means that maybe you're improving in a different area. They want to be a lighter and you want to be an FX artist. Now you can help them in that area as well. So just shifting my focus from it being a they win, I lose, to they win, I can also win.
Yeah, there's plenty of success to go around. This is something we've talked a lot about before, that just because it's the same whether it's as an artist, an individual artist, or as a business. Just because someone else wins doesn't mean that you lose.
No.
There's plenty of success to go around for everyone. Someone's also asking about it, like a PC configuration. And I think someone asked recently if we could do a video about like doing a build for getting into CG. I actually think that's a great idea. But in terms of this PC that we're streaming on right now, I can never remember. It's some kind of Intel quad core, 4 gigahertz something, 16 gigs of RAM, an unusual jump up in the graphics department because we have a Titan. Thanks to NVIDIA for that.
Cheers.
Yeah. So, but generally, I mean, you can actually get away with not like crazy high specs. Like you don't need like a full-on gaming rig to do CG. Like when it comes to rendering, that's usually where things will halt the most, or maybe your video RAM if you're doing intense texturing in Mari, But most of the sort of fairly easily accessible and affordable hardware, you can do most things in CG.
Yeah, I find that this is something which is overcomplicated a lot, and you could really do quite a lot of CG work with any run-of-the-mill gaming PC. It doesn't have to be a $3,000 rig at all.
No.
I've been using mostly a laptop for the last few years, actually. I only got a stationary computer, like, for first time in, like, I don't know, 6 years last year. And until then, I was just using a laptop. Now, what was a really nice upgrade there was specifically a nice graphics card. I can now use RTX, which is really nice.
Yeah.
So, and I can use GPU rendering, which is a very nice bump up as well. So a nice graphics card doesn't have to be the best one in the world, but a decent graphics card is really helpful. I currently only have 16 gigs of RAM, but it's also not a full-on production. I don't do production to the same extent anymore.
Wow, only 16 gigs.
Yeah, I know.
Jesus, what a loser.
Yeah, I know. Highest I've had, I think, was 128. I think that was a DNEG. That was quite a lot.
Yeah.
But I would say 32 gigs of RAM if I was doing it today, just because then you're just not going to run out unless you do something crazy. And then you build your PC based on if you do need some incredibly high specs for certain things. Maybe if you do simulation, I don't know what you need for simulation. Maybe you just need a crazy amount of RAM. So build it based on that.
A person like me who never draws or anything, but I know Maya and all, I want to get more into character creation in ZBrush. How can I start? Like the first step. Well, you don't necessarily need to be able to draw to do sculpting or be good at character art. it can help, but it's definitely not a requirement. I would just say, just open ZBrush. A lot of people are actually scared to actually get started. But also, start looking at some basics when it comes to anatomy and the human figure. That's really a great starting point. You need to become familiar with how people look, variation within people, and how people are built, structured. So
check out the 2 links I sent now in the chat. The first, this is for our Black Friday sale. We have 50% off of everything. The first tutorial here is Intro to ZBrush. The second tutorial is Intro to Sculpting. If you watch both of these and follow the advice in these 2 tutorial series, you will be well on your way. I wish I had these when I was learning, and the reason we built this is because it's kind of like a what Henning and Morten wished they knew when they were growing up kind of things. Is there some background music or am I going crazy? Sorry, Ed, you're losing your marbles.
It's just you, Ed. There's absolutely no background music.
Definitely no relaxing little some things here. Yeah, we have a little bit of background music.
But it's also very low now.
If you are working at a company as a 3D modeler or character artist, are you allowed to create your own work in your spare time? If you have your own artist practice, I'm referring to gallery work. There are probably some companies which are not allowing you to do that. I heard things about Disney, not entirely sure about that, but all the studios I worked at, they haven't had any issues with that. Morten and I were specifically allowed to work on FlippedNormals next to it. Yeah. So, but we had a contract with them as well. They signed a thing saying we could work on FlippedNormals because we were just afraid of that.
Yeah, we wanted to make sure that everything we did was sort of above board, that nothing would happen. So honesty is always good.
Yeah.
I find myself hitting a wall from time to time. How do I step up and get better? Well, this is life. This is with everything you do, any new skill or existing skill that you're trying to upgrade, you will always hit plateaus. And plateaus are often where people will quit because they feel like they're not seeing the same kind of progress as they did in the beginning, especially when you're just starting out. I mean, the progress that you see in the beginning is insane because you go from knowing nothing, like literally nothing, to knowing hundreds of new things. There's so much new information in your brain, so you feel like, okay, you just know everything now. As you progress, you start to realize that you know less than you thought and you're not as good as you thought, but overcoming those is, that's the tricky part. You just gotta push on and keep on learning, really. That's the best advice I can give.
We actually saw this in a very practical sense about a year 2 years ago when both Morten and I were trying to learn a language. And in the beginning, when you go from 0 to 500 words, you're progressing really fast. You can very quickly start to understand more things. Then you get to 1,000 words and you can understand more things as well. But then from 1,000 to 2,000, you're it feels like a grind.
Yeah.
But you just progressed as much as you did from 0 to 1,000. I mean, objectively, you just progressed 1,000 new words and you progressed 100% more, but you don't feel the same progress. And then once you keep doing this 10 more times and you're now at 10,000 words for language, and you go from 10 to 11,000 and you don't feel you got any better, but you progressed 1,000 new words. That's the same amount as you initially did.
Yeah.
But why aren't you feeling happy about that? That's an interesting one, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not. We saw that very specific. I would get upset because my progression wasn't fast enough, and Morten would be like, "Yeah, but you objectively learned as many things as you did before." So it's figure out if your progression is based on objective reality, or figure out if it's your brain kind of sabotaging you. Because I find that a lot of the time when you feel that you're not progressing, you are progressing, but it's because you're comparing yourself to where you were 2 weeks ago instead of where you were 6 months or to a year ago.
There's also a tricky stage where, well, that's the stage you end up in when you've progressed far enough, where you're self-aware enough to know that there are so many things you still don't know. You're unable to kind of see that in the beginning. I feel like in the beginning you learn so much new stuff so quickly that you feel like, okay, I just know everything now. But then, you know, a few years down the line, when you're more objective about your skills, hopefully, and about all of the information that is still out there to be learned, you realize that you can never master all of it.
Oh.
And you're just like, you just have to sort of pick and choose. But that's also another tricky stage. And that's the stage I feel like you sort of get stuck in after a while. And then you're just there because you still progress, probably not at the same rate because the subjects available to learn become less and less and you master them better and better. But then there are other subjects that are even harder to learn.
I think we are at an interesting level when it comes to sculpting, where we're both at a professional level of sculpting. We've done that, and we can build a portfolio and get hired at studios. But I still feel very insecure about my own sculpting.
Yeah.
Where, you know, for every single sculpt I'm doing, I'm like, all right, that was it. Okay, I've actually lost it now. This was a temporary thing, but now I've lost it fully, and that's just the same thing every single time.
Yeah, it can be quite frustrating actually. But yeah, that's what it's like to learn, you know.
Yeah, just embrace it. Just embrace that you're not gonna be fully satisfied with your work. That is just the way it is. You're not reaching this nirvana of now I am now good enough and I am happy with where I am. Some of the most insecure artists I know are some of the best ones out there.
Yeah. Someone's asking, yo, Blender user here, why the heck does ZBrush have Pornhub color scheme? I think the question you're looking for is, why does Pornhub have a ZBrush color scheme?
They just imported the skin from ZBrush.
But one thing to note on the whole imposter stuff and like feeling insecure, one of the things that really pushed me to try and be better was doing live streaming, sculpting live in front of people. That is nerve-wracking as hell in the beginning because now you're really exposed. Like if you mess up or you make something ugly, then your mind keeps telling you, okay, now people will know that I'm actually not as good as they think I am. So that's one of the things that helped me a lot, was actually doing some live streams and showing people what I could do and do it live. That helped me a lot.
Here's an interesting one. Do you think the mentality required to make it in CG is similar to that of a professional athlete? I would say there are significantly more jobs in CG than as a professional athlete.
Yeah, probably.
Like you can make a living as a decent CG artist doing local work, and you're not. Yeah, it's not like you have 20 spots in your region for the professional football team. There are, like, this is not like a job where you have to be the top of the world in every single field. You might have this impression, and I had this as well when I was joining the industry, where you assume that every single person is on a top row of ArtStation every single day, because some of them are.
Yeah.
If you're looking at some of the best artists on ArtStation, they are also working very much in the industry. But then you have a lot of people who work in studios who, while of course they're good and they're professional, they're fine in their terms of their skill set. They're good at what they're doing, but it's not like they have an interest in becoming the world's best. They're good at what they're doing. They don't necessarily do a lot of personal work, and they treat it more as a job than like it's their passion. You see this a lot when people have been in the field for a few years at least.
Someone is curious about in terms of the industry, whether we feel like the global CG industry will be moving to India. And I think it was for a while, and it still is. You know, I'm assuming you're asking about this from an outsourcing perspective, because that's usually what is meant with that in CG. And a lot of the stuff was being outsourced to India, but then there was kind of this shift with a lot of new technologies and better software that sort of meant that a lot of the stuff that was going to India now all of a sudden could be done with an automated process in-house by one artist maybe. So I think there's a tricky balance there where, yes, some work will just be continually outsourced to India because it's generally cheaper, but a lot of those jobs will also probably slowly start to disappear because of automation.
So here's my futurist prediction about how this works, which may be 100% wrong. The way I see it is, which is happening, has been happening, again, could be wrong, is you have things which are being done in London or in Los Angeles, in the Western world, expensive countries, where you have a lot of CG artists who are doing a lot of manual labor, meaning they're retopologizing heads from scratch and they're texturing based on reference, and you're doing things which aren't necessarily that hard to do, but they're very time consuming. And then the studios are thinking, well, why do we pay all this money when it's simple work? It's just very time consuming. Let's outsource this to China or India, where we can be done for a fraction of the cost. And that's fair business practice. They can now get the same amount of work done there because the reference is so strong and it's more about being a craftsman. And then the third stage is, since this is relatively simple work, it's not creative work in that sense, then we can build tools which can do this without people, because the companies don't necessarily like to have a staff of 200 people if they can have a much smaller staff which can do the same amount of work. So then I think we're going to see the next stage, which is jobs are going to go back to the Western world, but they're going to be done by a lot fewer people, where these people are stronger maybe in terms of programming or in terms of their artistic vision. And then we're going to end up with small teams which can do a significant amount of work on their own. And that was my little prediction. 3-step process, done in the West, done by the same work is being done in India or China for less money, and then it goes back to the West, but it's being done by significantly fewer people.
Yeah.
Could be wrong.
He's asking a follow-up question to that, like what jobs will be affected, and take an excellent example like retopology, where a lot of the retopology is now just done with wrap. You have a base mesh already done by one artist in-house, and then you just wrap that to most things. Something like tracking could probably end there as well. What's the word I'm looking for? The other one in comp, not tracking. Roto, yeah, that as well. So a lot of the more low-level jobs, more entry-level stuff, that I could see definitely going the path of automation.
More reference-based things.
Yeah.
When it comes to it as well, actually for retopology there, we're already seeing step 2 and step 3 happening. Step 2 is it's done in India, but it's the same work as before. And that is the retopology is being done. A lot of the retopology is just being done there by the same amount of work, but it's done by different people. Yeah. And then we have the third step, which is still retopology, which is it's done by a small team in a studio in London, and they're now using technology to do it. Instead of retopologizing the face, you already have a face pre-made and you're simply just wrapping it to it. Yeah. So there we are actually already seeing step 1 or step 2 and step 3 in effect. And the moment you maybe give it 10 more years, but if you have proper retopology tools for like the proper machine learning retopology tools, which can also UV map, then a lot of this work will definitely disappear from India and China and go back to the studios in the West, but with smaller teams.
I mean, take something like face shapes or an entire fax session for face shapes, right? That can all, topology for that is all automated already with wrap. You just load in a simple Python script, you place a few markers on the base face, and the software is smart enough to correlate that base shape to when the face starts to move. You use the same topology, you do it once, and the software takes care of wrapping it to the rest of the facial expressions. That's a great example of it.
Here's a good question. I'll take this one because it's a Modo question.
Finally,
to model with Modo. What do you think about it these days? Good choice or no? I mean, Modo is one of the strongest modelers out there. That's how it started out, and it's still a good modeler. It's lost some steam recently when it comes to modeling, I think, particularly because Maya and Blender got significantly better. But yeah, if you feel comfortable with Modo, it's an absolutely brilliant tool. And if you are fast with Modo, meaning you set up your custom hotkeys and you get some custom scripts and all that, there really aren't a lot of tools out there which are faster than Modo. I don't recommend Modo as a general tool anymore for freelancing. It used to be really cool and had a lot of momentum. Then something happened around 2012. There was some kind of acquisition or something. We don't really know. There was some kind of big company which acquired a smaller company, and after that, it lost a little bit of steam.
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit. Just like most of it. It lost basically all its main developers. It lost its executives, and yeah, it's not the tool I was hoping it would be. If I was doing freelance today, I would probably maybe I would use Maya Indie, which is quite cheap for that. If I didn't have that available, I would probably make a more custom version of Blender, where I was probably be using V-Ray as my render engine, which has been tested properly, and then just use add-ons for everything. But yeah, long story short, Modo is phenomenal as a modeling tool.
Yeah, I looked at Modo once when I started out with 3D, and then I just I downloaded it, the trial for it or something like that, and I just never opened it. It's interesting how small decisions like that can infer what happens like down the line, you know. And I'm actually amazed that I never got into Blender until we went full time with FlippedNormals. Because like looking at it, Blender seemed like one of those things that, especially starting out as a teenager, I would definitely have gotten into. Yeah. I just didn't know it existed.
The video you're looking at now, this is from Intro to Maya. There are two parts to Intro to Maya. We have the first part, which is learning what the tools are. How do you navigate? What is interface like? And all these kind of things. Then the second part, we're making essentially an industry standard helmet when it comes to modeling. We take it through making a fully procedural shader. We render it out. We make the groom and X-Gen, and we talk about render settings and the light setup in Arnold. So if you're interested in that, I highly recommend Intro to Maya. It's a series I made some. I mean, time is weird during Corona times, but I think it came out in April. Here's a link to it. So yeah, and this chapter here is just showing the block-in. This is a clean version of how I'm modeling. In reality, it's more messy. In this case, we know how many segments, and we are matching it up to reference, which is already my existing 3D model of it. But it's a good way of getting started with it. It's a good, simple, and clean way of working.
I don't understand this one. It seems to me you spell everything just like Gul'dan.
Gul'dan.
Isn't that like the World of Warcraft thing?
No, who is Gul'dan? I'm gonna Google.
Isn't he like the orc or something?
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, sorry, I don't
understand the question.
No, I don't understand the question.
Someone had another one like, what do you guys think about Marmoset 4? Yeah.
Looks cool.
Looks pretty cool. Got ray tracing, some real-time GI, refractions. Looks pretty cool.
I will just be back in around a few minutes. You'll just have to manage the stream for now.
Oh yeah, what am I gonna do? I'll just sit here like I've done for the past hour.
Comes back and is burnt out.
How's everyone else doing? Asking the real question, flat or puffy pancakes? I'm all about the flat pancakes, definitely. How's Emily doing? She's doing great. She's sitting in the other room, just working. I think she's on support duty. You know, when especially at times like this, where we have the Black Friday sale, there's always more support. So, why are our courses so expensive? Well, I think it's kind of relative. Like, what do you consider expensive? Generally, our courses are more expensive than other people's courses, but we also feel like we give you a lot of value for that money. So that would be why. Emily is my girlfriend who works with us here at the company as well. Advice on how to present nice assets in a reel, any type of way to present them to impress and show off. Be efficient with your presentation, especially when it comes to, let's take modeling as an example. Something you see quite a lot is people wasting time. They spin around the model 2 or 3 times. Then maybe they'll show a wireframe for another spin as well, but try to make it more efficient. That's the whole key with a show reel, is trying to be as efficient as possible. Because like when you have recruiters watching show reel after show reel after show reel, they need to be able to see right off the bat if you're any good. So minimize the time they have to look at it and present your best work, basically. So if you have like a lesser good work or older work that you still feel like you want to include, but it's not as good as the first stuff, definitely make sure to start off with the good stuff. Pectoralis major or gluteus maximus?
See what you did there.
I like the pecs. Maybe I would be interesting in hearing your response on that as well. No, you weren't here. Someone was asking why our courses are so expensive.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't necessarily think they are. Like, there's a difference between a lot of money and expensive. I don't think our courses are necessarily expensive in terms of like what they're offering. Like let's take intro to sculpting, which is normally $60. Now it's $30. That is the accumulation of everything we know about sculpting. Like it's not let's just throw together some tips. It's us sitting down for a very long time and sculpting a lot for a very, very long time, and then figuring out what do we wish we knew. Talking to artists for a very long time as well, figuring what they wish they knew. And we have then collected everything into one course where you can literally gain years on your sculpting skills by watching and following the course here. If I had this course, like, not trying to sell anyone anything here, but I would have personally been a much better sculptor very, very early on, just because a lot of the things I was struggling with would now be explained. And if you can then save years of practice by getting a course which is $30 right now or $60 normally, I really don't think that is expensive. It's like the whole like old story, you pay a mechanic like $10,000 just to like draw an X on the broken piece in your very complex machine, and you're like, why did I pay $10,000 for that? Well, it took me 20 years to learn where to put the X. It's kind of the same thing here as well. This is also compared to a university degree where you're paying, at least in the UK, you're paying $9,000 a year. Somebody were talking about before about should you pay like the $80,000 for a Norman? In this case, for something intro to sculpting, you're learning more about sculpting than you are in university courses. You don't have a lot of sculpting in university. You might have maybe 3 weeks of sculpting, and then your teacher doesn't know anything about sculpting. Like, if you're lucky, they have an adequate understanding of it. But if you're getting somebody who's been doing this for a very long time and refined it into, in this case, like intro to sculpting is a 15-hour course, I generally don't think that is expensive. I hope that answers the question.
Here's the kicker. He got back to us and said, no, he was just kidding.
Oh,
no. Someone else.
It's a good question, though.
It is a good question.
Because our courses, they aren't necessarily more expensive than other courses, but they cost more money.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's like how much value do you get from those?
Yeah. Someone else is curious. Why is your reference pink? I think they're talking about on screen. I thought it was like FlippedNormals pink in the beginning, but why is your reference pink?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. So the way we did a reference for intro to Maya, the way you have to do it when you're doing a tutorial, like you're teaching a tutorial, is you can't show the way you're actually working, because the way you're actually working is garbage. Like, if anyone has done something like this, you're not just modeling this up in a linear fashion and doing it. You're modeling a piece, you're deleting a piece, and you have 10 different pieces of reference, and you're kind of trying to line it up like that. I had to model this model 3, 4 times in order to actually figure out the approach for the teaching approach here. So then I modeled it up in a clean fashion, and I have all my notes ready so that people can learn from this and beginners can follow along. And then I took screenshot of it from the different angles, and then I made it pink. And the reason I made it pink, long story short, is so that you can see it. If it's gray, like it would be by default, then you can't really see it, and it kind of blends in with the background, and it blends in with your model. So just adding a little color to it, a little bit on brand, and just keeps it simple. But that is a thing which is really interesting when you are teaching, where like for this, it's not you just genuinely can't show your approach to it, because like how you actually approach it, because it is so messy.
Yeah.
If you're doing a beginner tutorial like this, you just would not be able to follow along. If it's a more intermediate tutorial and it's more this is how I work, that's one thing. But then it wouldn't be introduction to Maya. That would be watch Henning troubleshoot. But also a model like this is more complicated than it appears, because it has some hard surface shapes, it has some softer shapes, and a lot of things are being blended together as well.
Someone else is curious about what does a normal day look like at the FlippedNormals office. Well, it's very different for all of us. Take me, for example. This past 6-7 months, I've spent talking to lawyers and accountants, trying to move our company. We're currently moving our company from the UK to Denmark because we now live here. So I've been dealing a lot with that. Then I talk and manage developers for the site. And on the side, I slowly, and I'm trying to build up some tutorials and do stuff there, because that's something I haven't had time for the past 2 or 3 years. So, but it varies quite a lot, actually.
Yeah, it might also be that yesterday we spent a lot of time on the YouTube video. We always have that.
Yeah.
We do at least one YouTube video a week. Well, we do one YouTube video a week. And we try to prep that. We spend some time on that. I'm personally spending a lot of time figuring out the learning side of FlippedNormals. Like when you're hiring for tutorials and making tutorials, you can't just go, just make something which will be cool and we'll just get it out there. You have to figure out, you have to manage it, and you have to. It's kind of like you're building like a style guide for the tutorials, and you're making sure that everything is as it should be.
Yeah, we've seen that where sometimes we've given the people that we work with too much leeway with the kind of subject they want to do, and we haven't really had much to say. And while that can be great for the artist, oftentimes you end up with kind of a muddy tutorial where it's not as focused as it should have been, and the subjects aren't always as clear. So they like developing and planning for great courses and great teaching is really difficult.
Here's a question, which maybe you know this one, Morten. Have either of you had a chance to work with in-house studio grooming tools? How much better are they compared to something like XGen, Houdini Groom?
Yeah, no idea. I've worked with groomers, and I've never used XGen. I've heard you talk about XGen, and
rage about XGen.
The things you rage about with XGen, I haven't really heard people complain about in production with custom tools, because that would be insane.
So I've none of us have been groomers, but I know that a lot of the in-house tools are really rough because they're very old. And for instance, for Jungle Book, they were saying that the characters only look so good because of the artist, not the tools, because they were fighting a lot there. I know a lot of places they're going more towards Houdini grooming as well.
Yeah. Houdini
grooming is apparently great. In terms of XGen is in theory a great tool. Like, it has a lot of great functionality to it, and it's really powerful. The problem I have with XGen is just that it's crazy buggy. Like, it's really hard to use sometimes because of the bugginess. We have an intro to XGen series coming out after Black Friday at some point, which is going to be really cool. Because one of the problems with the bugginess is that it's a little bit your own fault as an artist, because you don't know how to use XGen correctly. Now that's still kind of XGen's fault, because they make it very hard to work with it correctly. But in this Intro to XGen series, you will learn how to actually use it correctly. You will know how to avoid a lot of the mistakes.
Why did the FlippedNormals iKit take so long? I saw the ArtStation post of the artist, and I was wondering if you guys are still working on that. No, it's out.
Yeah, I will post that.
Yeah.
So the reason that took a very long time was because I was moving country. So first I was in Norway. I was stuck there due to Corona, and then I was moving to Denmark, and then I was visiting my girlfriend in Cyprus, who we hadn't seen each other for like 6 months due to Corona. And then I was back here moving in, and then went back there to see her, and then I went back here, and we're setting up everything. So in short, we're gonna blame that one 100% on Corona. Speaking of the iKit, here is the iKit. The iKit is awesome. It's a kit which allows you to drag and drop eyes into really any software, both for games and VFX, and it's like full on industry standard for in terms of the quality. It's been made by hand sculpting the iris and also using a combination of like XGen and ice in soft image. I think he used. So like it's really methodically made. So if you're interested in making characters with eyes, which hopefully are most of them, then I would say the iKit is a huge help for you.
What's the industry standard software for texturing in film? It's both Mari and Substance Painter now. And in some cases Designer as well.
Yeah.
Wasn't Softimage discontinued? Yes, but you have this horde of crazy people who live and die by Softimage. Now, Softimage is a great tool. There was just no longer support for it. A lot of companies, they still... I don't know if a lot of companies still have it. Some companies still have a pipeline based around Softimage, but you got to think about that. If you set up an entire company pipeline around a piece of software, if that gets discontinued, that is very expensive for you to switch out. Like if you want to upgrade from Softimage to Maya, for example, it's going to take a while. A lot of tools have to be rewritten to fit in with a new piece of software.
So retraining.
Retraining is not trivial. That's one of the things we've talked about a lot when it comes to Blender not taking over the industry, simply just from an investment point of view for the companies.
If Maya was killed, if they were like, Maya is not going to be available as a tool anymore, then you might be talking about it, because like otherwise you were dealing with an existential problem at hand, meaning that your tool doesn't exist in the future. But if you're not just going to be switching, I'm sure not a single Softimage studio, exercise studio, was like, we're just going to be switching to Maya or Max just for fun of it. They would be switching because the tool that we're using wasn't available anymore.
When did FlippedNormals come into existence?
Around 7 years ago.
In October of 2013. That was when we first started publishing videos, and we had sort of spoken about it for, I don't know, a month or something, coming up with ideas, what we wanted it to be, what we wanted to do. And then we did that for about 4 or 5 years, and then we created the FlippedNormals marketplace and went full-time with that, and now we've been full-time for almost 3 years now. So, yeah.
How do you get good working with color, especially when texturing? Honestly, the way you get good with color is to color pick. You don't try to be fancy. Just use pre-made color schemes. Try to use existing color schemes. Pick from images you like. That simplifies your work so much. Use reference for a lot of things. Project images on top and keep it simple. Oh, now we have a new video. This is from, I'll find a link for this one as well. This is sculpting the facial features. In this video, we are sculpting an eye. This one on plane. This is a cool series because it allows you to learn how to sculpt the different things without the context around it. You're only focusing on the eye. You're not focusing on anything else. One of the hardest things when sculpting is figuring out how the proportions, how everything works in conjunction with each other. And here we're just being like, it's an eye on a plane.
Here's an interesting one, actually. How important is it to maintain a consistent polygon density in a mesh? That really depends. If let's say you're doing a face, you really don't want a consistent polygon density everywhere, because then that means everything is the same resolution, and some things need more resolution. Like the back of the head needs way less resolution or density compared to something like the eyes, for example. So the density isn't, it's dictated by what you're doing and how much detail you need.
Here's a question which is coming up a few times by Michael Ankrai. Why blur texture maps in production? Yeah, so you don't often blur your texture maps for production. Like you really shouldn't blur a whole lot of texture maps in production. You should try to keep them sharp. Maybe the question is relating to yesterday's video, which is we're talking about blurring the render. The reason you would blur the render is because it's too sharp. Like the hack there is you render at low resolution and scale up, but like the legit tip there is blur your renders a little bit because it will look too CG. You can also, I find if you're using images for displacement maps, like you're actually projecting on top, then you want to use a combination of blur and erode, because otherwise you actually can't see the displacement. It becomes way too sharp and noisy.
Someone was asking before about the helmet, whether or not it would be easier to sculpt it in ZBrush compared to modeling it in Maya. And it's a fair enough question, but I think especially when it comes to hard surface, when you have hard surface elements like that, where you have thin panels, sculpting it in ZBrush can be tricky. You can definitely do it, but where ZBrush kind of loses out a little bit is also the topology of it. That when you're doing something hard surface like that, you kind of work with the topology and the mesh at the same time. Whereas if you're just doing it in ZBrush, you'll have to go in and retopologize it afterwards. Yeah,
for the helmet, I legit don't think there is an advantage to doing this in ZBrush first and retopologizing. It's hard to get the exactly the shapes you want to. Maybe it can work. I mean, you can definitely get the same result, but I think the helmet there is a great example of where poly modeling is still very much thriving.
How do you convince someone to pose for you to take photos to refer to when you sculpt a demon? Yeah, I've friends, family.
Good luck with that one.
That's, just ask someone. Probably not someone on the street though, but anyone in the vicinity that they can help you out. We've done that quite a lot for each other. And I've sometimes when I've done this a few times where I've needed sculpting reference and I've seen someone maybe at the gym or something, I just tell them I'm a sculptor, and if I can take some photos of their face for reference, most of the time people are just like, yeah, sure, go ahead. But probably not for demon stuff. Like if you find someone at the gym and you're like, hey, can you pose for me as a demon? That probably won't work.
Yeah.
Will you ever make a video on changing directions of edge loops and edge flow? That could be a good
idea.
Yeah.
I feel we might have done that. Yeah. I've definitely taught it before because I was essentially teaching a class on retopology in Denmark, and I did nothing but changing edge flow for a week.
Right.
So that was very painful.
Oh, that sounds like the worst time.
That was very painful, but I got really good at it. Because you have 30 students and they all have to change their edge flow.
Yeah.
Like that's all you do.
Do you think ZBrush hard surface sculpting and remeshers will become better than sub-D modeling? No.
They're different skills.
Yeah.
They're just different tools for different jobs. It's like, do you think sub-D modeling will become better than sculpting? No, they're different tools.
It's one of those things that people misunderstand. Like when ZBrush first came out with, what's it called? Z-Modeler, people were losing their shit. People that don't know that much about modeling were losing their shit because they were spouting this stuff about like it's the end of any sort of traditional modeling. All modeling can now be done directly in ZBrush. And it turns out that you can't have like n-gons in ZBrush still. You're like, well, then I can't use it for anything. So it's the same thing there. You got to use the tool at face value. Use it for its strengths. But don't. They are very different.
Congrats on a job technical about one. That's really cool.
Yeah, that's super cool. Congrats.
There was again a question now, just for people who didn't see our discussion before. Is Modo a great modeler? Yeah, it's a phenomenal modeler.
We should just have that in the corner. Modo is a great modeler.
Yeah.
We should just have text on the screen, sort of like Modo is a great modeler. Blender sculpting tutorial when it's stable. Is Blender industry standard? No, not yet. Which grooming tool is the best?
Here's if you're working on any new upcoming tutorial ideas. Yeah, I have one which I'm gonna start working on as soon as I have time for it. As soon as I take time for it. That's gonna be introduction to Blender, but for advanced artists, people who want to learn Blender but they have no interest in learning they're no interest in being treated as a beginner. They're more like, yeah, this is the outliner. This is what it does. These are your hotkeys for moving and rotating. You don't have to explain them. What is an outliner? What is data management? What is the extrude tool? It's more, extrude is here. Click on this key. So we're gonna make a nice little tutorial on that. And then I promise Morten, I'll do a texturing tutorial for real this time.
He's like, just for reference, we've been talking about a texturing tutorial for I don't know, about 7 years probably.
Forever.
It's happening now.
Yeah, it will happen at some point.
Maybe.
And
I'm working on a ZBrush sort of only tutorial where about translating a 2D concept into a 3D concept or a 3D sculpt.
That's going to be really cool.
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting one.
We've had a lot of time now, which, like we said before, moving countries, both of us this year.
Yeah.
Pretty hectic, setting up the company, pretty hectic. A lot of things which we're formalizing now as a company. That will hopefully at some point be more on autopilot.
Oh, yes, please.
And then we can focus on doing more things. I would love nothing more than to make more exclusives, like by the two of us.
Yeah.
Really make cool things where we control it all and we can just really make it the best we can.
Yeah, and a lot of time, over the past 2 or 3 years, we've dedicated a lot of time, money, and resources to building up the marketplace. There's still a long way to go with the marketplace, but hopefully now we can start to focus a little bit more on getting back to our roots, doing more tutorials and stuff. We will have a push, like a development push at the start of next year, where we will be developing a lot of features for creators that customers won't necessarily see, but we really hope that we can bring a lot more courses to the marketplace that way. Speaking of the marketplace, we're currently having a 50% Black Friday sale on everything. So if there's anything you've been wanting to learn or any specific resources you've been looking out for over the last couple of weeks or months, 50% off. Let's go pick it up now.
Somebody's asking for cool Max tutorials, and we do have a lot of cool Max tutorials. I will link you some cool Max tutorials. Yeah, we have a lot of cool Max tutorials for 3.0 Max. I believe Tim Bergholz, Chamfer Zone, is using Max. He is. I just want to double check that. So here's a really cool Max tutorial.
I love the presentation of them. They're just
so good.
They're just super epic.
Oh hey, Waffle is here. I suppose that's Sir Stealth.
I was thinking.
It's weird that I know all of Waffle's names now.
It's got like 20 different nicknames on different social media platforms.
If you don't know, then like just by reading the last one, I could just know that was Aaron because he's calling us you nerds. So thanks, Aaron. When is the Unreal tutorial coming out? Well, yeah, we just have to make an Unreal tutorial sometime then. Then it will probably come out.
Then it'll be out.
Yeah. Emil, when is the Unreal tutorial coming out? Is Maya used for games or is it Max used more? So from having done some research into this, it seems like it's around 50-50.
Yeah.
Though it's a bit hard to get data on this because a lot of people, they only know their own studio, so it's a bit hard to get data on it. But like they're both used quite a lot. Yeah, wait for Unreal 5 maybe. Yeah, that's a tricky one because at some point you just have to release it. But yeah, we'll see what we do with Unreal. I would love to get an Unreal Engine 4 tutorial done. But yeah, it also is a bit silly to make that like the month before Unreal Engine 5 comes out.
Yeah, it's a tricky one when you know that new software is going to come out that has a lot of new extra features. Yeah, so we kind of just have to wait and see a while.
Yeah. Any free plugins that you can recommend to help speed up modeling in Maya or ZBrush? I think that I would have said yes a few years ago for Maya, but then Maya became good because they essentially acquired those plugins like Nex, basically the modeling toolkit. So today Maya is really solid out of the box. The UV tools are great, the Retopo is great, the general modeling workflow is just solid. For ZBrush, we don't really have, you don't really have a lot of great plugin support for ZBrush. There might be some specific pipeline tools you're using, some asset libraries, but you really have most things in ZBrush right away. And it's also a bit tricky with ZBrush because there isn't like Python support or anything. So there just isn't that good of support for plugins there.
What about Cinema 4D? Is that a thing? It's a thing.
Yeah, Cinema 4D is indeed a thing. That is phenomenal for motion graphics.
Yeah.
I don't know why I would choose Cinema 4D over Maya for general like VFX work.
No.
But it's very much used for motion graphics.
Someone would kill for a Mario creature texturing tutorial.
Well, you can also just,
No,
buy it.
Henning, they would kill for it. So
I don't think killing helps, but you can encourage us. No, I would love to do a creature detection tutorial. That is literally what I used to do as a job before. So I have a lot of untapped stuff there we haven't even touched.
someone is asking, where did you guys learn the most early on? I was on a site called tutorialized.com and 3D Total. Those two sites, that's where I spent all my time. Those written article tutorials, and I mean the tutorials on Tutorialized were garbage because no one really knew how to do tutorials back then. So it just didn't make sense, and they would skip like half the steps. You would end up with a model and you had no idea how you got there.
Can I go grandpa here for a second? YouTube didn't exist in its current form. There were no tutorials for 3D on YouTube.
No.
Like there was like a 5-10 minute limit or something, and there was nothing.
I had a book, like a legit book called the 3ds Max Bible. That was the name of the book. I think I had version 6 or something.
Yeah.
And that's how I learned most of the things I knew in Max at the time. There was this course about doing like a car, like this cartoon car, where you do it with very simple shapes. So that combined with the other services. And then later on, I got into like some of the tutorials they had on Gnomon Workshop. The Gnomon Workshop there was like a service that had really, really high quality tutorials, but was kind of hard to afford as a 16-year-old, 17-year-old at the time.
And not beginner friendly.
No, not at all.
They were full intermediate. Any advice on improving your texturing skills? Yes, I do. This is not going to be the cleanest pieces of advice in terms of like on a list, but here are some general things. Find a texturing software and learn that well. Without that, you're just going to be struggling. I recommend in the beginning Painter. If you have Substance Painter, you're in safe hands. You can do most things there. Then get a basic understanding of PBR. You don't have to understand the math behind it. Some would argue there. I would say it's not needed at all. You just have to understand what are the general maps required and how generally does the shader work. There are a lot of old style shaders which require tons of hacks. If you understand that you really only need a few maps, and with these maps you can texture literally anything, such as a color map, which contains, that's just the albedo map. It contains color information and no lighting information, no ambient occlusion, just raw color. Then you have roughness, which is just faked micro surfaces. Then you have displacement, which is faked modeling. Then you have normal mapping, which is also faked modeling. You really don't have a lot of maps. So if you can simplify your maps down to a few simple ones and just keep your shader simple, it helps a lot. Texturing is also a bit of a weird one, because at least in film, it's traditionally been look dev, meaning shading. Shading and texturing have been two separate things. So first you did texturing, and then somebody picked up your shaders. But it's the same thing. When you're doing texturing, you're just telling the shader what happens at a specific pixel. So it's almost like it's like a roughness map. It's kind of like having like a bunch of different shaders attached with different models, and you're just kind of blending between them. So realize that when you're texturing, you are essentially doing shading at the same time. So if you're keeping your maps clean and you're using a standard PBR shader, your maps should look very similar in Painter as it will do in the final render. So just keep it simple. And then the last thing I'll say in this weird little rant is look at reference. Seriously, observe reference properly. Don't just glance at it and kind of do some things. Color pick it, project it on your model, analyze every single piece and break it down into the different maps you need. What would the roughness map on your fire hydrant reference look like? Is it very shiny? Is it really dull? How many layers of paint does it have? All these kind of things. What is the actual color? Figure these things out and you'll improve tremendously as a texture artist. And don't use smart materials just because. Use them wisely. I think that's how you improve as a texture artist.
There you go.
No more pieces of advice there.
Someone was asking, what's the worst piece of software we've ever used? I have 2 on there. I'm not entirely sure which one takes the cake, but it's either gonna be UV layout or ZBrush. I'm not sure.
ZBrush, I wasn't expecting that. I mean, I agree.
It's because let me explain. So you have the tricky thing is that both of these softwares do their thing phenomenally well. Yeah. Like UV layout is still used, even though it looks like a garbage piece of beta software from like the 80s. No one ever cared about styling, menu items, or any kind of user friendliness. It is just a horrific piece of software, but it's so good at what it does. ZBrush is kind of the same, where it's like you don't touch ZBrush for a week, well, you basically have to relearn it. But it just does sculpting so well. So I don't know, I'm conflicted there. I don't know, it's either of those two.
The reason I think both of those are such bad, specifically in terms of UX, I'd say, is that they're very memory based. Like if I haven't used Maya for a while and a lot of my muscle memory is gone, I know shift right mouse button is going to bring me all the tools. Yeah. If nothing is selected, it's going to shift right mouse button is going to give me primitives. If it's selected with edges, it's going to give me edge tools. Polygons, polygon tools. If it's just the object is selected, general shading tools and primitives and all that. That means the UX is elegant and simple. If you haven't used UV layout for a while, you will not be able to do anything because it's essentially 100% hotkey based. Yeah. ZBrush as well is very confusing because you have to memorize things or you want to save. Normally you go to like document and save or file save. Now they have added this now in it, but you're like, what's the difference between just save as a project or as a tool? It's not based on logic. You have to memorize it. You have to understand the concept of what is a tool. They are making some of these things a bit easier, but the interface also doesn't make sense. People are saying that, it's lovely once you get used to it, but I still don't think it's lovely.
No.
You have all the interface items you can see on the screen right now, just lucky that it's there. And barely any of the menus are actually being used on the top. Everything is done under the tools menu, and you have to memorize all the things. So while I guess the power in both the software you mentioned, UV layout and ZBrush, is phenomenal, the UX is just terrible.
Yeah, and unfortunately that's a large part of what you interact with as a user. So there's another question about what is a thing that we wished we had learned early on or focused on early on.
Good one.
I think for me it was topology and UVs. I didn't know anything about that. Like UVs, I didn't do a single piece of UVing the first 3 years I did 3D. Topology was something that I neglected for the longest time, even though people told me. But I was such an arrogant 15-year-old that I thought, like, they don't know what they're talking about. I've done 3D for 6 months. Screw you. So those two things I kind of wished I had focused more on.
Yeah, it depends on when it is, because at different stages I regret different things. Basically, you become an old man filled with regret waiting to die alone kind of thing. Yeah. In the beginning, I wish I'd stuck to one 3D software, because I was like, well, I can't do what I want to do. It's the software's fault. So let's just try Maya. I wasn't good enough. I heard good thing it was a Lightwave. Apparently that was the thing. And everything was about Bryce. You know, all these weird different software.
Oh, Bryce.
But instead
Jesus.
of just sticking to one of them and just learning Maya really well and getting in there, I was just trying out all the things. So I spread myself so thin. Not thin in terms of skills, but thin in terms of just software skills, which ultimately doesn't help you because you should just stick to one. And then later on, as I got more advanced, I really wish I'd focused more on figure sculpting.
Yeah,
that's one of the things I keep talking about now. Is like even for anatomy, so many people they confuse figure sculpting with anatomy. They assume that if you know all the muscles, then you're good at making figures. But you're not. You're just good at connecting dots between things and making those muscles nice. But you don't understand how the figure works. You can't create appealing figures. So I wish I'd just done a lot more studies of the figure.
That was one of my issues. Like after I took the Scott Eaton anatomy course, I thought that I knew everything I needed to know about figure sculpting and characters because now I knew anatomy. But the problem is like you know every bone and every muscle, every landmark, all the surface anatomy that you need to know, but your eye is still out of whack. You still can't figure out the correct proportions and stuff like that.
And you don't understand shape.
No.
You can have a great understanding of shape, and like let's take it to the extreme. Would you rather have 100% understanding of shape and 0% anatomy, or the opposite?
Yeah.
Like you need a mix of those, but like if you understand shape really well, you can kind of look at some reference and you can replicate that, and there's gonna be mistakes, but it's probably gonna look pretty decent. But if you know only anatomy, only like the bony landmarks and the names for everything, it's gonna look weird. It's just not gonna look remotely correct. But you need both. You can't just have one. You should have both.
Someone's asking when they do retopology for a character, do you have to avoid triangles inside the shape loop? Well, I'm not entirely sure on the question, but in terms of retopology there, and when it comes to triangles, if you're in games, do whatever. If you're in VFX, then don't have triangles in areas of deformation, basically, unless they're for a very specific purpose. Like you can have a triangle in there if you know what you're doing. Generally, I would say, you stick to quads, it deforms nicely. Triangles, stick them on the inside of the eye, the nose, the ears, back of the head, where nothing really deforms and there's stuff on top anyway. There are certain use cases probably for having funkier topology if you need specific deformation for something, but as a good rule of thumb, keep it away from areas of deformation.
Would C-modeler work for video games since endguns aren't allowed or used there? I would say, I mean, you can use C-modeler, but C-modeler is just not a polymodeling tool.
I saw this crazy, this might be because I don't understand how this thing works. There was a talk, one of the ZBrush summits for Spider-Man a couple of years ago, where someone did like the Rhino mech suit. I can't remember the artist's name, but he used only Z-modeler. And I was watching the talk, and again, it might be because I don't understand enough about it. I've used C-modeler quite a bit, and it's horribly inefficient compared to traditional polymodeling. But he did the entire thing in Z-modeler. And to me, from the outside, it seems like a horrible idea.
I don't understand why you do that.
No.
Because it's just polymodeling. It has some different ideas, but for every good idea it also has like 10 crutches.
There's just so many limitations with it.
Yeah, there are.
Do you intend to have Medina in a live stream as well as to ask about MD matters?
We haven't really talked about having guests on.
No, not really.
Yeah.
Maybe. That's a maybe.
Medina, do you want to join a live stream? Any opinion on Lightwave? Is Lightwave pretty much dead in the 3D community these days? Yeah, I was kind of like shitposting on Twitter about Lightwave recently, and most people are just like, yeah, it's kind of dead. And then we get some. Turns out there are some Lightwave fans out there still, but the reason my opinion has been Lightwave is dead is that I have not met a single 3D artist who's been using Lightwave in the last 10 years or so. Maybe it's still being used within a specific industry, which I don't know about, but I've not seen anyone, I'm not just talking about met in person. I mean, I haven't seen anyone post on Twitter, LinkedIn, ArtStation, or anything that they have done any kind of work in Lightwave in the last years. So I will pronounce Lightwave, if not dead, I will pronounce it irrelevant at least. Deceased.
Maybe it's, it's a zombie. It's walking around,
Yeah,
still out there some places.
Is it? That's a true ZBrush cowboy making us proud. I assume they're talking about the rhino thing.
Oh yeah,
that is ZBrush
that
cowboy.
Is ZBrush cowboy. Yeah, I mean there might be like a legitimate use for it. I just didn't really see the point. So
yeah, no, same. I mean, like, I don't really have an argument for using it, and it's like, but I can't get Maya. Yeah, but then Blender is great for it. Like, spend some time and just get a poly modeling tool.
Someone is asking, you guys have awesome tutorials, but I'm assuming how, not ho. Do I get a girlfriend? Could be either or here. Would sculpting them help?
I find that getting a girlfriend is not related that much to your 3D skills.
This just because your skills aren't good enough, then she liked you for something else. No. If you're hotshot enough, definitely.
Yeah, that's it.
If you are like the best ZBrush cowboy, they will just be flocking to you. No doubt about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I actually have to get some lunch now.
Okay. It's like 5 o'clock.
Yeah, it's a late lunch. If you want to continue here,
I'll just continue.
It'll be like 15 minutes or so.
Okay. We're just gonna be talking trash about Morten for a little bit. Did you make Thanos? Morten made Thanos for YouTube, but we didn't make Thanos for the movies at all. I have not personally worked on a Marvel movie, which apparently is a blessing because they can be a bit hard to work on. Apparently, I have a lot of friends who's touched those. Morten worked on Infinity War, I believe, but not on Thanos. Henning, do we need tutorials when? Yeah, good question. We don't know. We are not making Houdini tutorials ourselves because first we have to learn Houdini to a really high level, and that's not on the menu anytime soon. But if anyone knows any good Houdini instructors, please send me a link. You can email me at henning@flippednormals.com, or you can find me on Discord, on the FlippedNormals Discord server. We would love to get something there. What are some epic movies you all worked on? Probably one of the biggest one, loudest one is probably Pacific Rim 2. That was a big and a very loud movie. One of the coolest ones for me was also Alien Covenant, just because it's an alien movie. It's not a good movie by any stretch, but it was a really interesting movie just because it's an alien movie. The same with Batman v Superman as well. It's more like it's a movie which people know about, which is cool. If you're like, oh, you worked on that film, people are like, oh yeah, I've heard about that thing. But if you tell them I worked on Monster Calls, they were like, yeah, I have no idea what you're talking about. Why is Doomsday a Ninja Turtle? That's a great question. I don't have the answer to that. Do employees get in trouble if they trash talk movies they worked on? I mean, it's a good question. You generally don't want to absolutely trash talk it, but let's face it, a lot of the movies you worked on are not necessarily great movies. I feel I have a right to say that because I worked on Ghostbusters 2016, but that was also, it's not a great movie, but it was a really fun movie to work on. How good the movie is essentially does not have any relation to how much fun you're having. It can be working on something like a Christopher Nolan movie. I'm sure it's going to be one of the best movies you worked on, but I don't think it's going to be a fun movie to work on simply because he doesn't really use a whole lot of VFX. Like they do so many things in practical effects. So VFX is more like background things or only very necessary things. Film and TV modeling artists is basically just good sub-D workflow. Yeah, basically, if you're working for film or TV or commercials, it's sub-Ds all the way. You just need to have a good understanding of sub-D. That's what you can see here actually for the tutorial which is playing now, the second chapter of the modeling one for the helmet. This is just sub-D workflow. You can see we're not sculpting up the shape and using booleans or anything like that. We are straight up just using traditional modeling techniques because they work really well. You know it's going to subdivide well, you know it's going to work in all scenarios. It's one of these, we're not using any hacks for this, because for this we actually want to genuinely show you how it's done. What are some common beginner mistakes you see beginner modelers make? That's a good question. I would say one of them is to go too high poly too early on. You can see for this guy, we're keeping it very low poly. And I'm very deliberate about where I'm putting my loops. We are not just throwing out all the crazy loops and just going crazy. In this case, we started off with a cylinder and then we're starting with a sphere. We're combining these shapes. Keep it dead simple. You really, really don't want to overcomplicate things. Start with a few primitives and block it in the most simple way. Another very common beginner mistake is that you model everything as one piece. In the case of this one, this is complicated a bit by the fact that it is one piece. It is actually one piece. But most things can be broken down into a lot of smaller pieces. If you're doing, for instance, an engine, it's gonna have like 200 different pieces. Like my girlfriend, she was making a tractor for her portfolio. And if you're just analyzing it, just looking at the main volumes, it seems like it's one very complex shape. When we break it down, it's a lot of smaller pieces. Some definitely are more complicated, but in general, a lot of them aren't that hard. So break it down into simple pieces. And the way I recommend you do that is it connected in real life? Well, cool, connected in 3D. If it's not connected in real life, then, don't connect it in CG. Future of environment art. That is a good question. I'm not an environment artist, but I will take some educated guesses. I'm going to assume there's going to be a lot more proceduralism. People are going to be using more libraries maybe from photo scans or from like straight up like substance designer materials, which are already pre-made. I'm guessing there's also going to be more Houdini involved as well, meaning you can create very fast environments really quickly. That's actually, if Emil is still here and watching, I would love your opinion on this as well. Should I break symmetry on the face or body of a sculpture before or after retopo? You should. It depends how big the symmetry difference is. If it's like the nose is a little crooked or one ear is a little bigger than the other, you should break symmetry after retopology. Then you can just do that as a blend shape and introduce that into a rig. But if it's if it has one ear and the other ear is missing, or if it has a huge horn and only on one side, or it's missing an eye, like meaning it's completely asymmetrical, then you should do the topology asymmetrically. There's a huge benefit to having symmetrical topology, just because it means you can do symmetrical UVs, meaning you can do symmetrical texturing. How long do you think you'll be streaming today? Let's see. Let's see how long we're going. We've been going for some time now, but let's see. I don't actually know. What is the proper workflow for mobile games texturing? I actually don't know. I haven't been doing texturing for mobile games. Substance designer 2D modeling capabilities have you used in production? Yeah, so essentially what you're talking about there is I assume are you using some of the crazy displacement hacks you're seeing? And in general, at least in film production, it's I find it better to model these things in. It's easier to texture them. It's easy to rig them. Let's say you have it's like a bolt for like an engine or a tank or something, and you do all of that in texturing. What if you want to move them? Now you can't, because it's in your displacement map. So I find it to be better to model it properly instead of doing these texturing hacks. Blender or Max for concept art? This is one of these areas where I just find Blender to be the undisputed king of concept art. Blender is absolutely a phenomenal tool for concept art. It is... I'm always hesitant to say that tools are objectively better than other tools. For modeling, Blender is not objectively better than other tools. It's up for debate. But for concepting, I really think it is. You can generate ideas so quickly just because of the philosophy of it. You can make any viewport into a rendering view. You have Eevee, which just speeds everything up. You can shade directly in the viewport. It just becomes significantly faster to concept. Thank you, Jazz Practice. I appreciate that. It's it's really nice. It's nice having a business partner who you can trust like this. Will you make a Maya Redshift course in the future? I would love to. Currently, Redshift is very much not on my radar, but it's under my radar in the sense that it's only on my radar. Like, it's not something I'm using actively, but it's a tool I am looking to learn, but we're not going to make tutorials on that first. The most likely tutorial first for rendering is going to be something like an intro to Arnold, where this would be a series where instead of going too crazy on the tech behind it, going through all the math, it's more, well, how do you use it? What do you think of the new Steppenwolf on Justice League? Well, I did comment on Twitter about that like 2 weeks ago, and I've gotten a bit of trouble for that, so I'm just gonna be silent on that for now. Yeah, it would be cool to talk to Arnold Schneider for Arnold videos. He's just phenomenal for Arnold. He knows all the things about Arnold, and I've been using his videos quite a lot when I've been learning Arnold myself. So are people working on projects right now when we're streaming? Do you have any cool work in progress things doing, or just finish something final? If you have like an Imgur link or something, would love to see what you're doing. What is a proper workflow for eyelid position and mouth position in professional environment? Rigorous choice. I mean, kinda. It does depend on the rig you already on the rig setup you already have. You will have an auto rig setup. You generally want to model with eyes open and the mouth closed, and the reason is that it's a lot easier to recognize the person that way. It's if you're gonna be looking at reviewing the model and the eyes are closed and the mouth is open, it's very hard to see if this looks like Tom Cruise or Jennifer Lawrence in this pose. So it's much better to model that in a neutral sense, and then you can potentially give the riggers something bespoke for that. You can change it later on, but when modeling, you don't want to go too crazy. It's the same thing if should you model in T-pose or A-pose. I far prefer something neutral to model in, because if you're modeling in something like a T-pose, T-pose is not a neutral pose. T-pose is actually a fairly extreme pose because the arms are as extreme as they go. You essentially can't take your arms more out. Now, everyone listening to the stream are going to just try to put their arms out like in T-pose. I'm trying that right now. And my arms don't go further, which means they are in an extreme pose by definition. But if you take them all the way down to your side, they're also in an extreme pose. They can't go further down. But if they're more in the middle, they're in a fairly neutral pose. So I find it far easier to review the anatomy of a character if it's in a neutral pose. Particularly if it's a creative character. If it's a human, then maybe it's a standardized system and it works. But for a creative character, it's really hard to honestly evaluate the design if it's in a T-pose, because the scapula rotates in a crazy way as well, and everything just goes a bit crazy due to the extreme position. Any tips on how to improve observation skills? That is a great question. What helps me a lot is to look at reference and try to recreate the reference. And I'm not just talking about kind of having a glance at it. If you're looking at, like, for instance, a human and you're trying to recreate that person, try to draw over the specific shapes, like the shape of the eyelid, the specific shape of the nose. Start looking at like a long shots or like a medium shot where you're seeing more the silhouette and general big shapes, and then match it up, and then go really close up on the mouth and the eyes, and then try to go in there and really match it up one to one. I find it more helpful to draw on top of the reference than draw on top of my model. The reason being that now you have to interpret it. If you're simply just lining it up with an image plane, I don't think you're automatically improving your observation skills. I think you're just making the model look more like the reference. So figure out what you want to learn. Do you want to make the model look more like the reference, or do you want to improve your observation skills? What are unprofessional things for a modeler to do? How do you identify a good 3D modeler? Well, you have some things, for instance, that you aren't working with other people. A good professional modeler is somebody who works with other departments before or after them. They take feedback in a really good sense, and they generally try to improve the team. If you are working in any project, like a commercial project, chances are that, as a modeler specifically, chances are that you very much have a team around you. And then you have to make their life as easy as possible. Instead of just being like, yeah, my work is done, just you guys deal with it. You talk to the texture artist. How would you like your UVs? Is there a way are there simple things I can do right now? I'm early in my modeling stage. Is there anything simple I can do at this stage which will make your life tremendously easier? Is there anything you can do which will make the rigger's life tremendously easier? And if everyone is doing that, the production just becomes a lot better. Everyone would just have a better time. The end result would probably look better, and people would just like you more. So if you are genuinely considerate towards other people, you will just be a much better professional artist. How do I identify a good 3D modeler, though? It's also a good question. One of the easiest ways is probably, do they have good models? Like, if you want to be a 3D modeler, first you just have to be good at modeling. You can have all the soft skills you want, like I was just talking about, communication skills. But if you aren't a good modeler, like none of this matters. First, you need to have good models, good varied models with good clean topology, good clean shapes, and then take it from there. I mean, first, you need hard skills, and then soft skills comes along, but you very much need both. If you are a great modeler but you're an asshole to work with, you will not be welcome in studios. You have to be of an extreme level in order for that to be accepted, and even so, people will barely accept you. So just don't do it. Please recommend some good Marvelous Designer tutorials. Well, I can most certainly do that. We have 2 which are currently out, which have been out for a little while. And then we have 1 which is being made by Elpida, who is currently making an introduction to Marvelous. So we have 2 really cool ones. I'm currently finding links for those. The first one is one Morton made some time ago, Constantly More Marvelous Designer in ZBrush. This is a really cool one. It teaches you a lot about Marvelous Designer and how to work with ZBrush and how to really get something cool. Yeah, we are very much live. And let's see if we can find the other one as well. Then we have creating a streetwear outfit in Marvelous. Both of these focus on making a cool result, and the one we have in production right now by Elpida will focus on making something we'll focus on teaching you Marvelous. That's a very exciting one as well. How should one try to understand anatomy as an artist? That is a good question. Where do we start with that one? So anatomy for me there are like two parts to anatomy. You have, this is something we briefly talked about just earlier. You have the technical part, which is what a lot of people often refer to as anatomy, which is this muscle goes from this place and from this bone to this bone, and it does that, and it's called something fancy in Latin or Greek or a mix between those, because anatomical names are a joke and there's no consistency between anything. So you have that, or you have sculpting humans, which is just what I refer to as figure sculpting. You need a bit of both, and you have to understand that they're two separate skills. And one is more memory based and the other one is more understanding based. If you can't read a book on figure sculpting and just understand that you have to sculpt a lot more. But you can read a book on just technical anatomy. This muscle is called this and it goes from here to here. That is more like a basic skill, while figure sculpting is more fundamental skill. What is a hard and what is a soft skill? Hard skill is like this. These are more our definitions, but a hard skill is something that you can very easily measure. It's something like how good is your 3D model? Like you can review that from a scale to 1 to 10, and it's something you're producing. A soft skill is something which is harder to measure but equally important. It's how do you communicate? How do you deal with other people? How are you as as a person in a production? It's more your personal skills. And then your hard skills is what would be how good are you in ZBrush? Is it a good idea to learn Arnold for lighting for TV and films, or what renderer is most used nowadays? So if you want to be a lighting artist for film, Arnold is a phenomenal choice. A lot of professional studios use Arnold, even though they might not be rendering in Maya. They're probably going to be rendering some like Katana or maybe Clarice if you're DNIG. But in general, it's Arnold in Maya is a great way of going about it. So yeah, Arnold. If you want to learn to be a modeler or sort of lighting artist of film, Arnold is really a good way to go. It's relatively simple to learn. It's very powerful. It will just chug through all the data you're sending at it. It's heavily tested, and it's currently my favorite render engine when it comes to just the final quality. What trend in the future do you think will develop for the 3D industry? I think we are going to be seeing a lot of different markets, which we aren't necessarily expecting to be in 3D. Like I was briefly talking about maybe like an hour or two ago in the stream, where you might have things like real estate, which is going to be using more 3D than they already are. Like you might have viewings in VR. Instead of you actually going to the place, maybe they're going to photo scan the apartment. And in an accurate sense, you can do that with your phone today. Like if you have an iPhone or like the most expensive iPhones or an iPad, they have LiDAR. You can scan it in, and then somebody could walk around it in VR, and it's a really good way of evaluating what it actually looks like. Or they could build it beforehand, and the developer could build it beforehand, like the real estate developer. And now you could learn what it's like to live there, at least in a visual sense, before it's even built, and maybe they can even have feedback on it before it's even made. Henning, you mentioned Clarice. What is its particular use and strong point in industry? Clarice is an interesting one. I use it a bit. Well, not a bit. I use it a little bit at DNEG, and it is a weird one. I don't recommend Clarice. Really, it's something that you learn if you start at a studio which uses Clarice, but I don't see any reason to really get into Clarice. It has some advantages. It's really nice for look dev. It has some interesting ideas for dealing with scenes. It's really cool for environments. It has some cool ideas for like scattering around, but it's also a weird one. So I really don't see the point of using Clarice as a main lighting tool. 3D is going to be a big part of UI, especially with AR coming up. Yeah, I mean 3D is just gonna be integrated in a lot of different areas. I also wouldn't be surprised if 3D becomes more important when it comes to mobile as well. Like now you can actually use, like I said before, you can use your phone for serious 3D work when it comes to scanning things. Like it seems to be getting better and better. Just imagine a few more years of that and you can do legit work with it. It also becomes more important when you have tools like Nomad, where in the last few years, what's happened with mobile is you got tools like Procreate for the iPad, where you can make final illustrations with it. And now tools like Nomad are coming, which means you can do a lot of really cool sculpting with it. I went to a museum like a month ago, and I brought my girlfriend's iPad, and I was just sculpting in Nomad. That's something you can't really do before. I could, of course, bring my laptop and bring a tablet or something, but it's so much more immediate to bring an iPad Pro and just sculpt directly on it. Do you think a 3D generalist has more of a chance of to get a job than somebody who's going in a specific area? Example, character artist. No, it depends on the industry. If you want to be only a character artist and you want to go into commercials, you're not gonna have a good time. If you want to be a generalist and you want to work in a big VFX studio, it's also gonna be a bit hard. Pretty much the only generalist department in film would be environment, where they kind of run their own show, but it just depends on your specific industry. There are different positions with different demands. If you're in a small studio and you want to be a specialist, you basically do not have a big chance. Imagine a company of like 20, 30 people. They're all going to be generalists, apart from maybe a specialist rigger or animator, which only will be doing that. But you're not going to have a character artist in a company of like 20 people, most likely. Is there a maximum age to get accepted into a studio for work as a fresh graduate? No, it's very based on your skills. Is hey from Mexico? Well, hey from Denmark. Is automated topology okay if I don't want it for animation but only for texturing? Maybe. Depends on the sorry for all my answers being this vague, but I don't want to say yes or no to something where there are a lot of factors which I don't know about. Automatic topology can be great if it works. If it works for you, then great. If you can't see any big problems with it, then fine. The thing if you're doing automatic topology for characters, you will find problems with it. You'll find problems with that very quickly. The moment you try to, if you have a character with automatic topology, you're going to see issues right away. If you try to redirect some loops, you realize the loops around the mouth are a bit nasty and it doesn't look that good. Try to fix it, and you're like, oh crap, I have to redo the whole thing. Are there any limitations, difficulty if you're trying to apply for a job abroad? That depends very much on your visa situation. Probably the biggest thing you have to worry about if you're applying for a job abroad is, can you actually get a job there? Can you live and work from that country? If right now Morten and I wanted to work from the United States, we couldn't do that. That would be very hard for us to do. If we got hired at a studio, that might be possible, but it would be really tricky to do that, particularly compared to somebody who's local. If I want to work from Germany, it's very easy because of the EU. That wouldn't really be hard at all. But if somebody from Brazil wanted to work in Germany, that might be a completely different story. So it depends entirely on what your passport says and entirely on what the foreign ministry in that country says about your passport. What is the best software for character animation? Tricky one. Most people seem to prefer Maya. Maya has a lot of great support for it. It has a lot of really nice rigs. At least it's the one which is used the most for animation. Hunter is saying, I just bought Introduction to Maya from the FN website. Thank you guys for awesome content. Thank you. I really appreciate that. That was a thing I spent a lot of time on, so I really hope you enjoy Intro to Maya. If you have any questions, just feel free to shoot me a message there. Intro to Maya is here as a reminder. Program is asking, what do you think about Topogun? Topogun is great. Really fast, very affordable, really solid for retopology. How many places use Substance Designer? I would assume most places use Substance Designer. If you are doing texturing, Substance Designer would be a really good tool, but you wouldn't use it as your main texturing tool. It's used for creating texture maps and authoring materials. But you know, if you use Designer in conjunction with Painter, then it's phenomenal. Topogun or Maya Quadro? I prefer Maya, and the reason is because it has more features. Not the Quadro specifically, but Maya as a whole has more features. I have this a lot where if I'm doing for instance a face, I would extrude parts, for instance, inside of the mouth, inside of the eyes and nose. I would extrude those out using traditional poly modeling tools, which is much better in Maya than it is in Topogun. And I find the tools are fairly comparable. So, but even though Topogun is a little bit better at the pure retopology, I find the advantage of having everything in one tool. It just speeds up my work. I don't have to import things in and out, and it just makes my life a lot easier. Which areas of Blender do you think are production ready, and if any? Modeling. Modeling is basically good to go. The good thing about modeling is that it's very standard. A polygon is a polygon. There's not a whole lot of confusion in terms of software. We have tools like FBX or formats like FBX, OBJ, and Alembic, which are very standard. So if you'll be able to plug Blender into most pipelines right away. There might be some specifics there where, for instance, when I was modeling in the studios, I prefer to use Modo, but I ended up using Maya because a lot of things were tied to the pipeline. For instance, there were camera lineups where the cameras were set up and I could just look through the camera and I could match my reference. Even though I found Modo to be a little bit faster than Maya, it didn't matter because all the other things were so much faster to do in Maya. So ultimately it was faster than doing in Maya. But Blender is basically there for modeling. I would need an add-on for retopology, or I would need to do something like a Topogun, and I would use something else for UVing as well, maybe like Rism, but or maybe something like 3D Coat. We now have Morten coming back as well. Oh yeah, and just a reminder as well, we currently have 50% off on all products on FlippedNormals, which you can see down a little banner. Currently the video which is playing is Introduction to Sculpting from the second part of Intro to Sculpting. Intro to Sculpting teaches you how to sculpt, which is insane. It teaches you a lot of things like what is appeal, what is gesture, what tools should be using, how do you get started with actually blocking something out. And then in the second part, we're sculpting what we're sculpting now on screen as well, which is a nice little dwarf. So here you can see Intro to Sculpting, which is currently 50% off right now. Have you tried the new Retopo Flow? No, but it looks great. I would love to.
Yeah, everyone was telling us to wait with doing any retopology in Blender until Retopo Flow 3 came out. So I'm glad we didn't wait. Yeah, because it took a while.
So when Morten's here, I will just head out for a few minutes again, so you can just take over.
All right. What are the major mistakes to avoid in is it composition or compositing? Composting. As in, like having organic matter break down. Do you recommend if I should, sorry, purchase ZBrush or pay for subscription? I'm just using it as a hobby. I mean, using it as a subscription for a while might be good, So, if a subscription is good to while you're testing it out, and then if you feel like it's really worth it and something you want to invest in, then buy a license. All their upgrades have always been free, which I've always enjoyed. Let's go with compositing then. Okay, for compositing, some of the major things to avoid. Yeah, it's kind of a blue ball thing here, like, because I'm not a compositor, but I'm trying to think if there's any advice I can give on the subject. If it was composition, then I could help out, but I probably won't be much help when it comes to compositing. Zero knowledge about fundamentals. Where can I start developing that? Well, we have a bunch of videos on our YouTube channel that cover a lot of art fundamentals, different kinds of fundamentals. So I would start there. It's always a good place to start. Someone was asking some mistakes to avoid when you're starting out with compositing. In the beginning, I wasn't clear if it was composition or compositing. I was really hoping it was composition because I could help out there.
You're just winging it now.
Yeah, but I don't know. Do you have anything you could think of when it comes to compositing? Something to avoid?
Yeah, using After Effects instead of Nuke.
That's a good one.
Use the right tool for the job. But I mean, we're not compositors. No. And if somebody were to watch me composite, they would probably be like, don't do it. Just here's a video of Henning doing this. Do the exact opposite of what he's doing right now. I can slap comp and I can do those kind of things. But it's pretty simple.
Someone's saying you guys are the cutest gay couple in 3D. Keep up the good work.
Thanks.
Are there a lot of gay couples in 3D?
I don't know.
I don't know either. No.
Yeah. Avoid using the normal blur. I guess it's for comp.
Yeah, probably. Use paint.
Yeah, that's a really good one.
Great compositor.
I'm a compositor. Biggest mistake at the beginning is not understanding pre-multiplication.
Ah, yeah.
Nuke is compositing is about 90% based on that. Now, I understand pre-multing. I actually...
Finally.
It took me a long time because I was... I was writing on Twitter, if you think you understand pre-mult, you don't understand pre-mult. And I got a lot of shit for that because people saying that, well, it was pretty clear that you were locked in the asset basement instead of doing any lighting work. So I was like, okay, should probably start to actually get it now. So I think I get it.
So now you definitely don't get it.
I definitely don't get it. Based on my own reasoning, I don't get it. Do you miss working on movies? Do you, Martin?
Nope, I don't. Yeah, no, I don't.
I sometimes miss sitting down and working on something really cool for like a few weeks, and I don't have to call lawyers and accountants and such.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't replace it.
No.
Like I don't regret the choice. Like it's because the thing is you can't have one without all the other things which is also involved. When it comes to movies, you can't just be like, yeah, I'm just gonna jump in there and just do like the beginning stages of a kaiju sculpt, and I'll be back. I'll be gone in a week when the fun part is over. You have everything else involved as well.
Yeah, I agree with that one. Like missing the like the time to sit down and just get lost in work, where you just concentrate on making something look as good as it can. That I can miss, but the whole working in film, no, I don't really miss that.
No.
How's the industry like now during this period? Barren is probably the best way to describe it.
Film is not doing great. Until they can start shooting again, then it's going to take some time. I'm going to say it's going to be pretty barren for like maybe up to a year. Because the thing is, in order to start shooting, you have to be pretty certain, at least mass scale shooting films, you have to be pretty certain that it's not going to lock down again. They were starting to do something now during the summer and such, but then you just can't. And that's a scary prospect for people with money who's trying to invest into this.
Yeah.
If you don't know if you're going to be kicked out of the country you're currently in, or if you can't go back to the other countries, scary. For film, you might have to first like shoot something in Spain, and then like a few weeks later shoot in Italy, and then Norway, and then Denmark. You need to have the safety of knowing those things, and not just if you're allowed to, but also maybe your cast gets sick. So yeah, and then after you've been shooting, it's going to take some months for those plates to come into the studio. But I think, though, the moment it starts to come back, it's going to come back aggressively, because then they have a lot of things they want to get made.
Yeah, it's probably going to be a complete shit show once things start opening up. You know, they like the studios and every production company, they're all desperate to make money, right? So once it starts opening up, we'll have like an overlap of maybe a few months where they start to shoot, but no footage is ready, and then all of a sudden it's just going to start pouring in.
Yeah. Any good entry-level character artist portfolio, is Julian asking. Well, Aaron, if you are still watching, you should post your portfolio there, because he has a pretty decent portfolio, where he started as a junior artist.
How can I start my own studio? That's tricky. I would probably recommend working for a few years, getting a lot of connections in different studios, and starting out as maybe like it's a freelance type of studio where work is getting outsourced to you. That would probably be my best guess.
And then scale up from there.
Yeah.
It's like a kind of like a theory in when you're doing business. This is something Morten and I have been talking about a bit. It's like the red water, blue water thing. You have blue water, which is nice and clear water, and then you have red water, and it's red because of the sharks. And there might be a lot of money to be made in the red waters, but there is fierce competition. Starting a VFX studio or studio today is pretty red watery. There are a lot of people who wants to do it, and it's tricky to get a foothold there. Like, it's doable, but I would not try to compete directly with other studios right now. I wouldn't try to go, you know what we do? We make Apple commercials and we make car commercials, because that is a tricky one. I would maybe try to go, we make the best figurines in the entire industry, or we can do VR and AR visualization. Now we have the tutorial from Morten, which is showing how to make awesome clothing in Marvelous.
Is that me?
Yeah, pretty sure that's you.
Oh, I thought it was Gavin.
Now we're watching a tutorial from Gavin, showing how to make pretty cool clothing in Marvelous.
I mean, it might.
Sorry, no, it's Gavin. There is one for you later on as well.
Oh, okay.
I just mixed them up.
I was like, did I make a vest?
Yeah. No, this is from Gavin.
Okay. You never know. I mean, I can't remember a lot of these things anyway, so.
No, this is from Gavin.
My people use Mudbox. Any special features? What?
Yeah, people aren't really using Mudbox anymore.
Right. Ah, okay, I get the question now.
I think that's
okay. Yeah. No, not really. Some people do. Some people that started out sculpting with Mudbox, they still use it, and they can make just as amazing pieces as people using ZBrush. But I don't know. I don't really see much of a benefit to using it, really. Aside from maybe like Udemy support, that could maybe be something.
Yeah. There are some.
And pure performance, like you can have a lot of polys in Mudbox.
Here's a question from a bit earlier from Craig again, who was asking. I believe he was the one who was asking about Nomen before, where isn't like going to college provides you with a safe environment where you just have dedicated time to learn. They will give you the assignments you have to do, and they will grade you, and they will give you feedback on it. And this is true, but at what cost?
Yeah,
it's very expensive. I think we should skip this video because he's only talking about. Maybe just skip ahead a little bit until we get into. Yeah, here we go. Because it's not that interesting just to show the vest.
Just a cursor going up and down the vest,
like a fishing vest.
PTEX in Mudbox. Does anyone use PTEX? Wait, didn't
XGen uses PTEX.
Yeah.
XGen uses PTEX for different things, but it's a weird implementation. Because first you have to paint on UVs, and then it converts it to PTEX internally.
So why use PTEX at all?
Why use PTEX at all?
Yeah, that's weird.
PTEX was an interesting one because people were like, now UVs are replaced. And then everyone was like, yeah, but we don't care. Because UVs don't take that long to make, particularly for characters. It's fairly a non-trivial problem to solve. And by not having UVs, there were so many things you couldn't do because now you weren't painting in the texture maps anymore.
Yeah.
So you couldn't just bring your texture maps into Photoshop and grade them and all of that. So for me, PTEX didn't really offer any advantages.
Someone's asking, why use ZBrush instead of Blender? What's the difference? Well, the main difference is ZBrush is a dedicated sculpting software, whereas Blender is, it's a multi-purpose tool. So sculpting is just handled better currently in ZBrush. Performance isn't that much of an issue anymore, it seems like, with a lot of the new developments in Blender. Another tricky thing though is the rapid development of things in Blender when it comes to sculpting. You don't know if things will be rewritten or redone. That happened a couple of times. So using it in something like a production can be tricky because you can't rely on something being stable for very long. Maybe when they get it up and running and it's a full release and they don't touch it for a while, then there's probably an argument to be made that you can start looking at it as a competitor if the sculpting feel is comparable. But as at the moment right now, I would stick to ZBrush.
Yeah, it's also because it's not that tested.
No.
ZBrush for sculpting is just thoroughly tested over many years, but if you're working on a software, it's essentially like beta features being released. You don't know if it's reliable or not.
Yeah.
Here's a good one. I'll take this one. What differences between good and average UVs from professional or godlike UVs?
Godlike UVs.
So UVs are a tool, and like any other tool, you'll use them for the specific job. You don't have a thing such as godlike UVs. It depends entirely on what the purpose is. UVs for film are very different from UVs from games, and the reason is because it depends what you want to do. So essentially, good UVs solve the specific problems you have in mind. For film, what it solves is it allows you to have full control over the texturing. And for games, it allows you to run really fast in engine, meaning that the UVs I made for film would be laughed out of any studio in any gaming environment, but they were really fast to texture. It meant that I could texture one side of the face, simply run a quick script, and it will just copy paste those UVs or those texture maps from one side to another. And that was due to the nature of the UVs. It also meant that I could use tilables in a really effective way, and it would be reliable based on how I oriented the shells. But the way I oriented the shells were not optimized for texturing space. So good UVs for film, easy to texture. Good UV, and you can get all the texture qualities you want in there. You can get variation, such as you don't have overlapping UVs, meaning you don't texture one tooth and they all get textured. It means that every tooth is unique and you can have full control over it. Well, for games, you might make one tooth and they all get the same textures. So it just depends what you're working on.
Here's an interesting one. Where do you see Blender in 5 years? Yeah, I gotta be honest, pretty much in the same spot as it is now, if I have to be honest. I think some smaller studios will have picked it up to save on licensing costs, also just because there are more people using it, but I probably wouldn't expect that much to change even within the next 5 years.
I think what could happen is if the moment some studios start to pick it up, then they have to develop pipeline tools. Like they will just straight up have to do that.
Yeah.
And once they do that, hopefully they will share those back with the community, and then it gets stronger pipeline tools, meaning the next studio have more incentives to use it as well. And now those people have to build more pipeline tools. And then you have like a bit of a snowball. But yeah, tricky one.
Yeah, because you kind of need the pipeline tools in order to get it properly rolling.
Yeah. What I'm thinking as well, like I've been thinking about this a fair bit as well, because I've been writing an article on this, why Blender is an industry standard. And it's a tricky one. One thing I think will happen is that you'll have a studio starting, maybe a bunch of freelancer or a small studio, and they will be deciding to use Blender as their main tool. I don't think you're going to see studios switching from Cinema 4D or Maya or anything else to Blender, but you might have new upstarts which will be using it.
It just comes at such a cost to retrain and restructure your existing pipeline tools that are already custom and have taken development time.
So a big way I see that start being used is startups start to use it and they develop new tools and they share those tools.
And like individual artists at a company, like let's say you're working at a VFX company or house and you're a modeler, then sure, you could install Blender and do most of your modeling in Blender, but you'd still have to get into Maya and make sure that everything was good there, the hierarchies, the outliner, everything. So for parts of the modeling process, sure, you could use it there, but there are still things that need to be done within the pipeline.
I think it's going to be used more by individual artists, and I think it's going to be used more by freelancers and concept artists. I think concept art is going to be a large part taken over by it.
Yeah.
We're already seeing concept artists moving over to it, and I think if you're doing concept art in some years and you don't know how 3D works, you're going to be at a disadvantage.
Someone is asking for my personal anime recommendations.
You don't really like anime. You just watched it a lot to learn Japanese.
Yeah. There are a few that I've enjoyed, like Made in Abyss. I thought that was pretty good. And like classics, Death Note.
Full Metal Alchemist.
Full Metal Alchemist, that kind of stuff. But recently, I also like Kimetsu no Yaiba. I don't know the English name for that one. But that's about it. I don't really watch that much anime anymore. So.
Will this Q&A be recorded? Yeah.
It's just gonna be on the channel.
Yeah.
So
it's gonna be whatever this is.
So as soon as we go offline, it'll just be there. Demon Slayer. Yeah, that's the name in English.
They live in Japan. We lived in Japan. Right now we're in Denmark, where there is no sun. It's cold.
Welcome to Northern Europe. Any tips on how to learn Japanese? Be persistent. I don't know. It's a tricky language. It really is, especially if you speak any language that's kind of English or related to it. It's definitely a tricky language to learn. But I don't know. I think it's just being persistent and just getting a lot of input, like from native sources, like Japanese TV, reading stuff. Just getting really exposed to the language as much as possible, and trying to avoid being exposed to foreigners teaching Japanese, because they'll probably teach you something wrong grammatically or how to say stuff. So
Blender Cycles versus Maya Arnold. It's not even funny how much more refined Arnold is as a render engine than Cycles. Cycles can be more immediate because it works directly in the viewport and just because of the nature of Blender. But as a pure render engine, like Arnold is so much more refined. As an example, when we were setting up the iKit for both Blender and Arnold, it was pretty standard to set it up for Arnold. You enable some subsurface shaders or some subsurface for the iris, and you plug in the transmission map to get the transparency working. In Blender though, that didn't really work. We had to use a hack just to get the eyes to look right, due to the fact that I believe it was caustics just looked crazy dark in Blender. The iris was just stupidly dark. So there were a lot more variables like that which just aren't working yet. Also, it doesn't have light linking. I know I keep complaining about that, but that is seriously like a big thing. People have been saying that what is missing? Well, apart from light linking, that doesn't count. No, but it does count. Light linking, for those who don't know, means that you can specify one light for one object. So for instance, if you have a full character, you can say that this light will only affect the hair, or this light will only affect the eyeballs. So Arnold is just a much more refined engine than Cycles. They might look similar on the surface, but when you start to get into it and you start to troubleshoot it, Arnold is much more refined. And there are a lot more nodes as well, a lot more utility nodes. So yeah, it's a tricky one there. Arnold has just been tested on so many big productions as well, and that is just something that you can't say about Cycles. Like half the movies you're watching in a cinema have been rendered in Arnold. It's been built by the VFX studios. You just can't compare those two things. It looks simple on the surface, but under the hood, it is really strong. It can just eat just about anything.
Yeah, I remember when we were doing the promotional stuff for the FlippedNormals eye kit, I was using Cycles to render this super close-up of an eye. And first off, like, it was a nightmare because I didn't have light linking, because I wanted very specific reflections to appear in certain places and only have light effects on parts. The other thing was mesh lights, actually. Mm-hmm. That one was just broken. Having mesh lights in the scene somehow affected like computation of lights in terms of the intensity. I found it very hacky or janky once I actually started working with it for more close-up and high-fidelity shots. I think for general purpose stuff, it performs really, really well, but it just hasn't been production tested to the same extent. It goes with, there was a question about V-Ray as well, if that was used in the industry, and you know, it's a massive rendering software. It is used a lot in ArcViz. I believe Blur still uses V-Ray for their character cinematics, or maybe they've switched to something else. I don't know, but they did for a long time.
I like V-Ray.
I really like working with V-Ray. One of the things I really like about V-Ray is that I don't have to adhere to reality. You know, I can tweak different samples for different things, not on an overall level like in Arnold. So that's one of the things I really like about V-Ray. But V-Ray was also like the first render engine I really got into. So
V-Ray is really nice because it's like if you need a pipeline when you just have to throw unlimited data through this pipeline, I think Arnold is going to be better. Like you need just the biggest shots in the world. But for a lot of things, you don't need that. It's kind of like, well, if you need to carry unlimited amounts of things, your tractor is going to just do that. Sometimes you need a bike. Sometimes you just don't need that. And I find V-Ray to be really nice for it can also do really heavy things. But for instance, the iKit, it renders a lot faster in V-Ray just because it doesn't necessarily just brute forces it the way out of anything.
Yeah. Yeah, you can optimize it a lot for render time.
So I like both of them. I like both Arnold and V-Ray. I tend to use Arnold the most, but honestly, personal preference.
But like we mentioned earlier, like nowadays, most of my rendering work, because it's not production or freelance based or anything, that is just done with either Cycles or sometimes Eevee as well.
If I was doing my own little freelance shop, I was not using Maya. I would probably look into Redshift for Blender. I know it's in beta currently, but once it comes out, that would be really cool. Or straight up V-Ray for Blender. Which one is used the most for TV and movies, RenderMan or Arnold? I mean, most kind of the same thing, really. Like all the different engines, but like they're used a lot, both of them.
Yeah.
If you want to become an artist who works in film and you want to light, it doesn't matter that much which engine you are using, because you will have a custom solution. You cannot just download the software they're using and just do that. Lighting specifically and like the shot assembly tools they're almost entirely proprietary, or if they're using Katana, they will have their own proprietary setups with the nodes. So if you want to do that, it really doesn't matter what you're using. You will have to relearn a bunch of things. You should understand the main concepts behind things, and then you have a good chance.
If you need a Japan vlog, just go to my personal channel. There's some videos from Japan there.
What is your primary source of income now? FlippedNormals, or are you guys in a job or something? Yeah, if you check out a lot of links we've been sending out now, we're sending that to FlippedNormals.com, and that's because FlippedNormals.com is our income source. It's a registered company, and we've been doing that full time for 2.5 years now.
Yeah.
Just hitting 2.5 years now next week, I think.
Yeah, so that's the primary one. It is interesting. I think people tend to overestimate how big of an impact YouTube has in terms of revenue, and a small part of our revenue is actually from YouTube. The vast majority is directly from the marketplace.
Kieran is asking, what are your thoughts on using scan data to get a project up and running? We discussed this a little bit in yesterday's YouTube video.
Yeah.
My opinion is using scan data is absolutely phenomenal for intro to sculpting, for instance. When I was preparing to sculpt the dwarf, you won't see this in the tutorial, but this is how I did it when I was prepping. I got a scan of a human, and I just sculpted on top of that. Straight up just like dynamesh it and just sculpt on top of this and just change everything.
Yeah.
And it allowed me to concept it around maybe twice as fast as I would otherwise do, because you don't have to worry about just technical things. Like when you're a beginner, you have to focus on how do I sculpt an ear and how do I sculpt an eye. But then once you've been doing this for a while, you don't care. You don't have to prove to anyone you can sculpt an eye or an ear. You just can't do that. And it becomes about the idea. And then using a scan gets me to the idea point right away. There is no more starting from scratch, starting from a sphere. Depends what you want to do. If you want to become a character modeler and you're showing that you present a scan as your own original character, not great. Don't do that. Be honest about it. But if you're using it as a starting point for your own concept art, it's phenomenal. What software do you grooming artists use? Probably some of the strongest commercial grooming tools out there today would be Xgen and maybe Yeti and Houdini.
Yeti is great. I used to use Yeti for a while, and it's pretty easy to use, actually. I remember we talked to them at some point if they wanted to sponsor like a license for us so we could do videos on it, and they were like, no. Okay.
Are there upcoming FlippedNormals challenges coming up? I really enjoyed the Halloween theme event of 2019. We actually have one currently ongoing. If you search on any social media platform for hashtag #SculptNovember, you're going to be seeing a lot of submissions, and you're going to be seeing posts from us as well. So we currently have that. It's a bit of a different challenge. It's more of a social media challenge instead of a full-on one, but there are still cool prizes for it. So check that one out. After Christmas as well, I would love to run like a proper challenge, like in the like late winter, early spring, or something like that. But we haven't really talked about that yet. But that would be amazing. Oh, nice music.
Yay, it's back.
What is the future of studios after the pandemic? I've heard most employees prefer working from home, including myself. Do you think remote work is going to be something normal? I think remote work is here to stay. But I also think that while a lot of people really love working from home, a lot of people really hate working from home as well. That's where they want separation between the work and their personal life, and also they just enjoy the banter at work. They just enjoy
having a community.
Yeah, having a community there, and just having clear separation for it. But I really think work from home is here to stay, at least as an optional thing. Now they're developing the tools needed for it, and it's also going to be a competitive thing as well. If you want the best talent and you're not, and your competitor is offering work from home and you're not, like that's hard.
Yeah.
I was talking to somebody recently who were thinking of moving to Spain and working from home from there. And if you can have a London salary working from Spain, you're doing well. Or if you then have to move back to London, it's a very different. You're competing on a different level than if you can offer work from home. But yeah, like a lot of people just prefer working in an office. If you want to live in London and work from an office, that's absolutely fine. And I think a problem we have to solve as well is what do we do with junior talent? Because I think it's very hard for juniors to start working from home. Just because you need a lot of constant supervision in the beginning. You don't know how the tools are working. You still have to refine your skills a little. You have to learn how to communicate properly. these are things I think you kind of have to be on site for.
Yeah, I mean that I don't think that's ever really going away, because you need guidance, and like you can't just come in fresh, your first job, and just understand everything that's happening. That's not gonna work.
No, you need somebody, you need a mentor who you can personally know. I think that might be me being old man Henning and being conservative and not seeing a path forward. But I really don't think it's a good idea that that's done like that. Maybe the studios would go like, all right, once you have a year experience, this new tier unlocks or something. This is a fun one. The studios still have super secret custom software these days.
Super secret.
So, story time. Some years ago, I was teaching at the animation workshop, and I was meeting with our teacher there who was teaching a class on texturing. And he was like, all right, cool, this is how you texture in VFX. They were like, no, really, how do you do it? And he was like, yeah, you use Mari. Yeah, cool. But what do you actually use? We use Mari. And they just wouldn't accept the fact that what they had to play with was basically the same thing as you had in the studios. I mean, if you're working as a modeler, there is no super secret software. It's Maya, it's the UV tools, it's ZBrush, and you just don't have that many custom tools.
A super secret version of ZBrush.
Yeah.
That works and the UI is nice.
Yeah. It's very similar to what you're working with. They do have custom tools for lighting, rendering. There are a lot of custom tools for animation. It's still in Maya though. The rigging pipeline is most likely completely custom, even though that's also in Maya. But it's not like you're coming in there and you have no idea what's going on.
No.
I know ILM, they have a super secret tool which they use, but for general scene assembly and such. But I think that's more legacy than anything else.
Secret brush. That's great.
That's awesome.
Have you used Wing 3D? If so, what did you think about it? I have. I actually have. Once. Because I needed to import a Wing 3D model so I could export it as an OBJ. And it was great for that exact thing. Other than that, I don't know.
Do you have experience with art tests? In VFX, art tests aren't really a thing.
No.
I'm glad I've never really done one because that seems very stressful.
I did hear about one actually. A colleague of mine who he applied for a job at Sony. They actually made him do a test.
Oh.
But that was like 10 years ago.
Oh, wow.
So maybe. But we've never done it. No one I've worked with like that in my time has really had to do it. So
no, we use the power of charm and words.
Yeah, and said hire us based on our skills. And they were like, okay, that sounds fair.
Maybe it's also something to do with competition as well. If you have, like in London, you have a lot of smaller studios, and then you have 4 big ones. You have NPC, Framestore, DNEG, and ILM. And if you're more senior, you can, it's not that you can pick and choose, but you're probably not going to go hungry there. You can probably go between them. And then if NPC is like, look, we need you to do an art test, you're like, hello, Framestore. Because you're not just going to spend a month of your spare time doing it.
Oh. Here's one about the Huion display tablet. How's it going with that? Well, it's going great. There are just 2 things that really annoy me about it. One is the color accuracy out of the factory. I need to still calibrate it, but the color is god awful when it comes out of the box. The other is the driver is kind of janky. Like sometimes, I don't know if it's just in ZBrush, but sometimes it'll just stop working and you'll get this jittery brush feel where it'll lay down multiple strokes instead of having like one smooth stroke. Those are 2 really annoying things. You have to restart, at least that's in my experience. I have to restart my computer in order to fix the whole weird driver issue. The color stuff, we'll probably buy one of those like spider monitor calibrator things because we need it for the office anyway. And then we can try and calibrate it that way. But those 2 things are really annoying. Other than that, I think it's great. Yeah,
we both have the same one, and I'm starting to get really annoyed by the driver issue that pops out. Yesterday we had to record a video, and I think we spent something like 20 more minutes just setting it up because of it.
And we had to reinstall a Wacom driver to use a Wacom tablet because we couldn't use the Huion.
That was very frustrating. You have to reset up all the, like we had like 5 scenes for 3D software all set up, and we had to open all those a few times.
Yeah.
And yesterday when I was sculpting for the stream as well, everything was working. Then I was just going to test it real quick, and it was broken. So then I had to reboot the computer. So it's really annoying that it's not reliable. Maybe there is a driver update coming, but
That would be nice.
know of any good books for Substance Designer 2018? I don't think there are books for it.
Not really.
For
Very
3D
few people do books anymore.
Yeah, for 3D software, you don't really want books. That would be really scary because you spend all the time on a book and then it's out of date like a year later, particularly with the Substance tools, because they have been maturing so fast.
Yeah, I don't know if I can see the appeal of having something written down, but I think one of my main issues with books when it comes to using them as like how to learn a software, oftentimes books will go through the entire software where you don't need to know that much. You don't need to know all the ins and out of the software.
Yeah, I find them to be annoying, like same with documentation as well when I'm learning a software. I don't want a tutorial to be the documentation. I want to watch a tutorial which takes me through with the main things, is pre-filtered information, and then I'll watch documentation or read documentation to really get into the specifics of it.
Just back to the Huion thing. No, it wasn't the Wacom driver because I had uninstalled the Wacom driver when I got my Huion. So my computer was clean. It only had the Huion driver.
But apart from, in terms of like the sculpting experience, it's top notch.
Yeah, I feel like I sculpt better with that tablet.
I was also able to kind of calibrate myself just using my eyes and a MacBook next to it to compare the colors.
Yeah, it's still not there.
Still not there, but it's a hell of a lot better. Like out of the box, it was unusable.
Yeah. Blender software book 1 month later, out of date. 1 month, it'd be like the next day.
Yeah. I personally make books on the experimental builds.
The nightly ones.
I dropped out of college doing an animation course. I still want to pursue the 3D industry. What would you recommend? The thing is, a college degree isn't necessary. Like, nobody cares about the paper. They care about your skills. If you want to maybe do an accelerated course for 3D animation, you have specifically for animation, I recommend something like iAnimate or Animation Mentor. I haven't checked them for years. I don't know how much they cost. But I know a lot of people who've been going through them and they swear by those courses. They've been able to get to a really high level within something like 18 months. The thing if you go to a college to learn animation or to learn CG is most likely it's not going to be focused on what you need to learn. So it's going to be a bit of everything, but if you want to specifically learn animation, an animation specific course is the way to go.
If you could sum up in a couple of steps everything you got to learn for someone who's a beginner to get their skills up to par with a master at sculpting, what would they be?
Oh boy.
That's a long one. Hard work, a lot of patience, persistence, figure sculpting, anatomy, sculpt, do a lot of studies, practice. It's just hard work. There are no easy steps, really.
Yeah. It's too generic question to give you a specific answer, but deliberate work over a long period of time. You do not learn CG over like a 6-month period or something like that. It's a lot of hard work over a long period of time. Do diplomas for those courses be better? Well, those diplomas be better than the college ones, like the diploma from Think Tank and CGMA. Diplomas matter very little. Maybe it helps you to be motivated, but like, let's say you don't need a visa to work somewhere. If you live in the US and you want to get a job in the US, or live in Canada, want to get a job in Canada, the diploma or the bachelor will matter like not at all. I would say it's 99% irrelevant. The people you might meet there can be relevant, but the pure piece of paper is not. It's a job which requires the skills. That is what they will look at.
I think we can do a few more questions. And
we've been doing this for a long time now, so
wrap it up. So if you have some final questions you wanna throw at us, now's the time. What do I need a visa? What if I do need a visa for it? Well, I mean, then like a higher education can be helpful sometimes, just in terms of like the visa points. But if the company wants you badly enough, I'm sure they can figure out a way to get you there.
Maybe it's also possible to go to a cheap community college or something to get the bachelor's, and then you can learn around your own time. But I wouldn't go to like an $80,000 school to get the piece of paper. Like if it's a pure formality, then do what's required for that formality. And maybe before doing that, if you know that, let's say you're currently in Egypt and you want to go to Canada, before you venture onto this journey, figure out what's needed. Figure out, like, maybe see if you can talk to the immigration department, give them a call. Maybe you can have a free consultation with an immigration lawyer so that you can plan that before you assume that, before you make assumptions.
Does the industry use layering modeling? Like first the base is a skeleton on top of muscle, then outer part. I heard the industry uses SIVA, which needs skeleton muscles, main mesh. Yeah, I mean, in terms of the actual modeling part, no. That's generally not how it would work, unless you need to do simming, right? If you need to do simming, then you would have the body, just the mesh for it, and then like clothing on top. If you do something with SIVA, with muscle simulation, then yes, there can be parts of it with the muscle. If you do something really high fidelity where you need accurate subsurface, you would have a skeleton on the inside, then the muscles. It's very dependent on the project. So there isn't like a blanket answer of yes and no, but it just depends on the kind of project you're working on.
Here's just a quick clarification. Oh, so it doesn't have to be a bachelor in 3D. It might, I don't know. That's what I'm saying, like do some research on this, but maybe if your local university doesn't offer that, maybe it can be on fine art or something related. It can be a graphical design. Like just do your own research on this. Like we are not immigration lawyers and we don't know anything about this in this sense. So talk to people who knows what they're talking about. Don't just ask like on a forum or Reddit or Twitter online, like ask people who are qualified to talk about these things. In this case, probably an immigration lawyer or like the state departments in the various countries.
Someone has a final question. Ooh. What percentage are all the products off at the FlippedNormals store? That would be 50. Everything is currently 50% off on FlippedNormals.com. So go buy a lot of stuff. It really helps us.
When will you be live streaming next? I don't know. Let's see how much energy we have.
We have a irregular stream schedule of maybe once every 3 months, and then we stream for like 4 days in a row, and then so just keep an eye out for our like social media, Twitter and stuff like that. We'll usually announce it there.
Maybe Monday. I still have to do another scope for my mentor.
Right, yeah, okay.
Let's see. Any recommendation for cloud storage services? Dropbox is great.
S3 if you want to go crazy, like Amazon's. If you're going real crazy. No, Dropbox is just fine.
Should we do one final question?
Okay.
Let's see if you guys have any good questions. That's a final one.
We'll just give it a little bit.
Give it a little bit.
What is the best effects scene in a movie, in your opinion?
The one you didn't know was there. The one you thought was just the one you believed was real with all your heart.
I'm trying to think of like a really epic one. Like Armageddon, maybe? Maybe in Armageddon. Yeah, maybe there. I don't know.
In your opinion, what 3D modeling software is the best?
That's a great one to end on. Yeah.
That the best tool for 3D modeling is, drumroll, the one you are good at modeling with 3D. The thing about that is it really is down to personal preference, because 3D modeling is probably the most standardized thing in the entire industry. The formats are interchangeable, the concepts are interchangeable. You have polygons, you have n-gons and triangles, and you have UV maps, and everything kind of works with each other. So if you are an absolute genius at modeling in Blender and your pipeline uses Maya, well, it's probably fine that you can do that. If you love using Modo, it's fantastic. Personally, the tools I enjoy modeling in would be Blender, Maya, and Modo. Those are great. If you enjoy modeling in Max, go for it. So it really is what you prefer and what tools you have available. Do you have anything to add to that, Morten? Any
It's all personal preference. There is nothing the best, the worst. It's, whatever works for you, just make it work. Yeah. Now, it's obviously different in a professional setting where you are forced to use something, but for personal stuff, just use whatever works for you.
Yeah. All right. We have been streaming for quite some time, since 3:30, and this is 3 o'clock, and now it's 6 o'clock. It's a good 3-hour stream.
That's a final thing. My favorite dinosaur is the Brachiosaurus. There you go. So you have that. Very relevant. All right. Yeah, that's it, I suppose. So thank you guys so much for hanging on to this stream. And remember, now go to FlippedNormals.com and buy something. Because it's Black Friday, you need to. Everything's 50% off.
Yeah, so thank you so much for watching, guys. This was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed these streams, and I would love to do more of these as well.
Yeah.
The stream will be available on our channel as well. So if you want to, listen to our rants about different things again, or if you just want to kind of sneakily look at the videos playing in the background, which are previews of the premium courses, you're more than welcome to do that as well.
Yeah. So thank you guys, and I guess we'll see you very, very soon.
Yeah. Cheers, guys.